Chapter 1166. Jiang Shangyu was well aware of what was going on with those sword Tao laws. He was Jiang Shangyu, but he could also be regarded as an unknown who was in a weak state but retained part of his memory. This strange state allowed him to ignore the suppression of the real environment in his base to a certain extent and improve his combat effectiveness. It was also because of this that he suppressed Ruthless. And now Li Tianlan's state, to some extent, could be regarded as the counterattack of the real environment. Real and illusory were two completely opposite environments. In the real world, there should be no absolute chaos, and there should be no absolute order. So when chaos and order appeared in the real environment would definitely change. This was the most basic rule. So within the scope permitted by the rule, the real environment could easily integrate with the real individual. In the whole Miracle City, Li Tianlan was the most real individual. So Li Tianlan could ignore the suppression of the environment with the help of his divine form and come to Tianan from Yuzhou. So Li Tianlan's strength soared and he could even use the sword laws. He ignored the real environment, because at this moment he was the real environment. And now, with the disappearance of the shadow and order, the real environment would become stable again. This also meant that Li Tianlan's state would slowly decline to his real level. Li Tianlan would still be unparalleled in that way. But at least it would not be as desperate as it was now. The most important thing was that Li Tianlan would not know this. Your Majesty East Emperor is really powerful. But the final battle in Beihai is over. Your Majesty came all the way here to fight us. Are you going to continue to show your power? Jiang Shangyu suddenly smiled and began to talk nonsense. He could not see Li Tianlan's attributes after the order transformation, but he could roughly feel the strength of his energy. At this time, Li Tianlan's energy strength was strong and magnificent, like a star, which people could not look directly at. But this intensity was decreasing with every passing second. At most 5 minutes, Li Tianlan would return to his normal state. At that time, it would be their time to make a move. Jiang Shangyu stared at Li Tianlan closely. His smile was light and breezy, but the killing intent in his eyes was constantly flashing. The speed of Li Tianlan's appearance disrupted his plan, but it also let him see another possibility. In his normal state, Li Tianlan could be called invincible. But this kind of invincibility did not make people lose the courage to resist. Gu Xingyun had successfully broken through. In other words, among the 3 of them, 2 of them had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm and were at the same level as Li Tianlan. The other one was also at the top of the peak of the invincible realm, and his physical quality had also surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. If the 3 of them really joined hands, coupled with the hundreds of villagers in the base, it would be impossible for them to survive. All these forces together might be able to keep Li Tianlan here. The most important thing now was to wait for Li Tianlan's condition to return. Li Tianlan also smiled. His eyes were as sharp as a knife. He paused beside Gu Xingyun and then fell on Li Guangtu. I really didn't expect the 3 of you to stand together. How arrogant was Li Guangtu? At this time, he actually cooperated with Gu Xingyun. Not to mention Li Tianlan, perhaps all the people who knew Li Guangtu couldn't think of it. Is it enough to kill you? Gu Xingyun gently raised the corners of his mouth, and his eyes were full of resentment and insolence. Before Li Tianlan could speak, Jiang Shangyu had already said with a chuckle, "It's improper to fight and kill. We have no conflict of interest with His Majesty East Emperor now, and there is no need to fight to the death. Your Highness is the war god of Zhongzhou State, and His Majesty is the future guardian of Zhongzhou State. You two should help each other. This situation must be what Zhongzhou State wants to see." His voice paused slightly, and he looked at Li Tianlan with a smile. Your Majesty, what do you think? There was no doubt that this was a reminder or a warning to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan could attack Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu, but Gu Xingyun had an official identity. As the current state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State, if Gu Xingyun died in the hands of Li Tianlan, it would definitely cause a stir. Chen Fangqing's death put Li Tianlan in a difficult situation without evidence. Li Tianlan killed Gu Xingyun. Once the evidence was conclusive, the situation of Emperor Dong's palace would undoubtedly be more miserable. Jiang Shangyu wanted to delay time, and he also wanted Li Tianlan to have concerns. Once he had concerns, he would think carefully. Once he began to think, his will would be scattered. In this way, the speed of his condition's decline would become faster and faster. Li Tianlan quietly looked at Jiang Shangyu and was silent for about 2 seconds. "Are you done?" he asked casually. Jiang Shangyu's pupils suddenly contracted. Li Tianlan didn't like nonsense. Not only he knew, but the whole dark world knew. So before the voice of this rhetorical question fell, the endless sword light had suddenly burst out. The sword rain covered the world. Li Tianlan's figure rushed forward. The sword formation of the 13-story building completely disappeared around him. Li Tianlan was barehanded. Like a flash of lightning, he suddenly appeared in front of Jiang Shangyu with a long series of residual shadows. Boom 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 da boom. Several domains released by Jiang Shangyu with a wave of his hand were almost completely shattered at the same time. Li Tianlan's figure tore the domains and rushed over without any pause. The sword energy was boiling, the storm was fierce, and the thunder was powerful. At this moment, not only Gu Xingyun, but even Jiang Shangyu felt a little suffocated. This was an unimaginable impact and sense of oppression, with endless power and strong aggressiveness, as if it was crushing their souls in all directions. Strong anger and indifference rushed over. Jiang Shangyu suddenly raised his arm. In an instant, the space in front of him folded layer by layer and became extremely dark and gloomy. One after another, small distorted domains spread out in front of him. Li Tianlan rushed straight to him. The domains were instantly shattered. He punched. The two men's fists collided with each other. Jiang Shangyu's body was directly hit out like a cannonball. His body had just left the ground. In the flying blood, Gu Xingyun's body had been smashed away at a faster speed than Jiang Shangyu. Countless different sword lights rushed directly to Li Tianlan in Gu Xingyun's flying blood. Li Guangtu completed the handprint. Ninth sky and infinity. The sharp sword light surged out. One after another, the sword energy shone brightly. 9 heavens wind and thunder sword. Heavenly flying fairy sword. Heaven-breaking rainbow sword. Peerless myriad Dao sword. Jifeng sword raining technique. Nirvana sword. Yin and Yang sword. Great void sword. Phantom sword. The sword energy was dense. Countless sword lights converged on Li Guangtu at the same time. This was Li Guangtu's first real all-out attack after the Battle of Mormons, and the degree of his desperation even surpassed that of the Battle of Beihai. Li Guangtu's eyes were calm and determined. It was an incomprehensible and indescribable paranoia. Li Tianlan. At the very beginning, in Li Guangtu's heart, the name was completely a joke. Li Honghe tried his best to cultivate him. The giant group spared no effort to support him. All of this was meaningless in Li Guangtu's eyes. He looked down on Li Tianlan. In his view, Li Tianlan, the nominal heir of the Li family, was just a puppet on the surface. What could he inherit from the Li family? During the Li family's decline for more than 20 years, the loyal core members who had followed the Li family were transferred every year. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital accepted most of the elites who were truly loyal to the Li family. Some of the secret resources left by the Li family were also absorbed by the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital stayed dormant in East Island and slowly grew stronger. What did Li Tianlan inherit from the Li family? The glory of the past? The heavy responsibility? Was that a tragic graveyard? The hostility of the Wang family of Beihai? The suppression of Kunlun City? It seemed that that was all. For Li Guangtu, who really held the core of the Li family in his hands, how could he take a fancy to this so-called heir of the Li family? Li Guangtu never thought about letting Li Tianlan inherit the Li family. He thought Li Tianlan didn't deserve it. Only he was the real master of the Li family and could lead the Li family to the real peak. Li Tianlan would grow. Li Guangtu didn't mind giving him some help at first. Because with Li Tianlan's continuous growth, he could attract the hatred of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai to the greatest extent with the remaining elites of the Li family. In this way, as the real Li family, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital could come out at the most critical time, give the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City the heaviest blow, and rise again. At that time, Li Guangtu was confident that he could kill Li Tianlun, who had grown to a certain extent but not to the peak. He was just a target to attract attention. What could he do? But there were too many accidents. For more than 20 years, Li Honghe, who had a very bad relationship with him, gradually handed over the elites of the Li family to the purgatory of heaven capital for the sake of the Li family, but he did not agree with Li Guangtu's plan at all. The relationship between the father and son was getting worse and worse. When Li Honghe really made up his mind to train Li Tianlun as the real successor of the Li family, he gave Li Guangtu a heavy blow first. In the purgatory of heaven capital, the heavenly parish hall was out of control. Everyone knew that the purgatory of heaven capital had Sunluo Hall, life-prolonging hall, and Athanasi Hall, which were also the three parts of heaven capital that the dark world knew. In fact, in addition to Sunluo Hall, life-prolonging hall, and Athanasi Hall, there were two other important core components in the purgatory of heaven capital: Heavenly Parish Hall and Heaven Azura Hall. The Heaven Luo Palace was in charge of intelligence. The Li family's case of treason broke out too abruptly, and the senior management dealt with it very decisively. Li Honghe's concession was very firm, which also left some hidden dangers that the senior management and the Li family were well aware of but no one could expose. Li Honghe had controlled the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State for many years, and his layout was not limited to Zhongzhou State. After the case of treason, the Li family's forces in Zhongzhou State were almost uprooted. Li Honghe retreated to the border with thousands of elites, but the Li family's overseas layout for many years was almost unscathed. It was not exactly unscathed. The Wang family of Beihai provided a lot of information and took the opportunity to absorb a lot of overseas forces belonging to the Li family. But overall, the Li family's overseas layout, various intelligence teams, countless secret lines, and various high-level spies that penetrated into various departments were retained at least 60%. This part of the power began to gather together with the rise of the purgatory of heaven capital. The Li family's elites constantly escaped from Zhongzhou State and entered the purgatory of heaven capital by faking their deaths, and finally almost completely restored the Li family's overseas power network. And this part of the power, it was the Heaven Luo Palace of the purgatory of heaven capital. It was mainly responsible for intelligence collection, financial expenditure, searching for resources, various investments, and so on. The core agency hidden in the dark like the Heaven Luo Palace was the Heaven Fall Hall. It could be said to be the core agency of the purgatory of heaven capital, and also the strongest hidden sword of the purgatory of heaven capital. The Heaven Fall Hall was responsible for assassination, surprise attack, beheading, and attacking. The existence of the Heaven Fall Hall could be said to be the strongest combat force in the purgatory of heaven capital, except for Li Guangtu himself, and it could be competent for all tasks. Because it was an agency with an invincible realm expert and the strongest assassin. The Heaven Fall Hall was the hidden sword of the purgatory of heaven capital, but it also had a name that everyone in the dark world knew. Sai City, Zhongzhou State. From the day Li Honghe made up his mind to let Li Tianlun inherit the Li family, the Heaven Fall Hall went out of control. This was something that even Li Guangtu did not expect. No one could have imagined that Li Honghe had such a deep influence on Sai City. Sai City stood directly beside Li Tianlun. This was the beginning of Li Guangtu's mental imbalance. Then everything began to go out of control. The Samsara Palace set off the final battle of heaven capital. Qin Weibai found the purgatory of heaven capital hidden in East Island. At that time, the alliance between the two sides was cooperation, but also a threat. Before Li Guangtu made up his mind, Qin Weibai almost forced the purgatory of heaven capital to come out and get involved in the chaos. The air that Li Guangtu had carefully cultivated died inexplicably without any warning. The purgatory of heaven capital appeared in a high-profile manner at the most critical moment of the final battle. Li Guangtu and Wang Tianzong fought to a draw. Then a series of things gradually went out of control. The purgatory of heaven capital got East Island. Although it was an unexpected result, Li Guangtu was very satisfied with the result. But then there were several years of chaos in the dark world. The purgatory of heaven capital was already in the game and could not stay out of it. So not only the purgatory of heaven capital, but the situation in the entire dark world began to go out of control. All the superpowers were fighting, and the contradictions kept escalating. With the destruction of the Mechfield Alliance, all the conflicts were quietly controlled by that woman and concentrated in the snow country. The dark world fell apart. The superiors of the divine and holy lists died one after another, and the power structure completely collapsed. No one could have thought that the chaos in snow country would come to this point. But when it happened, it was already out of control. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough was more like a fuse, completely detonating the last madness of that era. The Polar Ground Alliance, the Jiang family of South America, the Men in Black, Rothschild, the Shadow Throne, the Holy Land, the Fantasy World, the Knights Templars, the Heroes Club, the Wang family of Beihai, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Kunlun City. All the superpowers, including the Samsara Palace, fell from the throne and had not recovered yet. The eternal sword light shone above Mormons, completely burying everything in that era. All the superiors of that era were either dead or injured. So, at the dawn of the new era, Li Tianlan and Dong Huang rose rapidly and grew stronger. Li Tianlan made rapid progress. The strength of Emperor Dong's palace also developed rapidly. The Purgatory of Heaven capital kept a low profile because of Li Kuangtu's injury. It even withdrew from East Island and curled up in Tiannan. With the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, the voices inside the Purgatory of Heaven capital became more and more discordant. Li Honghe did not leave much for Li Tianlan, but it was by no means little. Xianxia province was originally the base of the return of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in Li Kuangtu's plan. Now it was in Li Tianlan's hands. Sai City, the sharpest sword of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, was now in Li Tianlan's hands. Qingye, Fireman, Eagle King, and some other real elders and core elites of the Li family were now in high positions in Zhongzhou state and were about to become the backbone of the new group. They were all loyal to Li Tianlan. These people supported the most basic framework of Emperor Dong's palace. As Li Tianlan reached the peak, the Flourishing Age Fund merged with Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan absorbed all the power hidden under the water of the Samsara Palace with his fragile foundation. The country that Qin Weibai gave him was quickly stabilized on the foundation of the Li family. So Emperor Dong's palace soared to the sky and was completely above the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Today, the people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital were unstable to a certain extent. All this was because of Li Tianlan. Li Kuangtu found that before he came to his senses, the young man, who was a joke in his eyes and he had always looked down on, had already walked ahead of him. Whether it was individual force, overall power, or influence, Li Tianlan had surpassed him. Why? He resented Li Honghe. He resented him for not supporting him to deal with the Wang family of Beihai. He resented him for treating Li Tianlan as the heir of the Li family. He began to resent everything about Li Tianlan. Those should belong to him. The current Emperor Dong's palace should also belong to him. He finally began to regard Li Tianlan as an opponent, but he found that when he looked at him now, he had to look up to him. It was impossible to understand this mentality without personal experience. It was jealousy and unwillingness that could burn everything. Li Tianlan. The name changed from a joke to an unforgettable one in his heart. And just today, just now, this young man, who he had always looked down on, looked at him condescendingly, said that he would give him a chance and ask him if he knew his mistake. Jealousy, anger, unwillingness, resentment. All the emotions completely exploded in Li Kuangtu's mind. His whole person became extremely crazy in an instant. Why? Why should he know his mistake? He was right. The extremely strong negative emotions completely swallowed Li Kuangtu's reason. At this moment, because Jiang Shangyu was repelled, Gu Xingyun was repelled. Facing the truly invincible Li Tianlan, Li Kuangtu's counterattack was resolute, without any concession or compromise. Li Tianlan's figure approached quickly. Pieces of sword light condensed around Li Kuangtu one after another. All the defenses were abandoned. The injuries in his body were no longer suppressed. Outbreak. He tried his best, hysterically, and desperately broke out. All the unique skills he had mastered were completely tilted. His potential was burning wildly. Li Kuangtu controlled more than 9 kinds of sword energy at the same time in the endless ninth void. All the sword energy from Jade Pool, Mount Shu, and Jifeng Sword Raining School were boiling around him. In the center of the boiling sword energy, Li Kuangtu, who was shining all over, also became a sword. A pure sword. The sword light burned on him. So the pure sword also disappeared. Li Kuangtu became a pure sword energy. 24 moves of sword. Buzz. In the violent buzz, heaven and earth shook at the same time. The extremely dazzling sharpness burst out in pieces. With Li Kuangtu as the center, all the trees and grass within a radius of hundreds of meters were completely torn apart. The ground was shaking wildly, and cracks began to spread one after another. The seemingly chaotic but orderly sword energy was constantly changing and rearranging itself. The wind and clouds were surging inside the forest. With a loud bang, the ground within 100 meters completely collapsed. The underground water surged out, and a lake suddenly appeared inside the forest. The sword light moved between heaven and earth. The sharpness tore up the surging water, and the lake was overturned in an instant. A large amount of water rose into the air, turned into sword energy, and turned into frost. The anger was boiling, and the temperature in the air was extremely high. The fire began to spread in the frost, and the storm roared between the ice and the fire. The space, which had been distorted to the extreme, was constantly rubbing against each other, bursting out a piece of electric arc. The electric arc instantly turned into dense thunderbolts. Li Kuangtu's face was pale, but his blood-red eyes were full of extreme madness. A large amount of sword energy, which constantly vibrated and changed its order, enveloped everything. In the sword energy, the storm raged, the frost spread, the fire spread, and the thunderbolts surged. Li Kuangtu disappeared completely. A whirlpool of sword energy with a diameter of hundreds of meters appeared directly in the forest. The whirlpool rotated wildly, devouring and tearing everything apart. One after another, the sword energy was constantly surging and condensing crazily. Each sword energy carried several different sword intents. Li Tianlan stopped. He could feel Li Kuangtu's anger, his depression, his unwillingness, indignation, dissatisfaction, jealousy, and even despair. Li Kuangtu was burning his potential. This could even be said to be a blow that surpassed his peak. So Li Tianlan's advancing figure stopped in place. Countless afterimages formed because of his fast speed completely disappeared. His body faced the huge and magnificent whirlpool of sword energy, which looked extremely real. He just stood quietly with a calm face. This was not fear, nor was it fear. The reason why he stopped was very simple. He didn't think of anything. He was just waiting for Li Kuangtu's strongest blow. He was calm and indifferent. In the constantly rotating whirlpool, the anger continued to surge. Li Kuangtu was obviously completely irritated by Li Tianlan's calm attitude at this time. The sword energy in the whirlpool was even stronger. The whole huge whirlpool changed its shape in the distortion, stretched and extended in the air, and finally turned into a giant sword hundreds of meters long, completely condensed by sword energy. The sword energy of the 24 moves of sword was the blade. Countless sword energy were the blade. The giant sword crossed between heaven and earth and chopped down wildly at Li Tianlan. Violent, crazy, cruel, and swift. There was mighty sword light everywhere in the forest. The giant sword, like a divine punishment, chopped down from the sky and instantly reached Li Tianlan's head. Li Tianlan raised his head expressionlessly and looked straight at the sword edge. In the almost earth-shattering sword, he calmly raised his palm. Bang! The giant sword across heaven and earth chopped directly into Li Tianlan's palm. To be exact, it chopped on a weak and almost imperceptible sword energy in Li Tianlan's palm. That tiny strand of sword qi, which was as tiny as a strand of hair, forcibly withstood the gigantic sword in the sky. In the next second, the sword light flowing on the giant sword began to dissolve rapidly. The sword energy in Li Tianlan's hand continued to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. All kinds of sharp but different sword energy hovered wildly in his hand. 9 Emptiness and Infinity. The same unique skill. Almost in the blink of an eye, there was also a giant sword in Li Tianlan's hand with sword energy crisscrossing. This is Gu Xingyun, who was ready to attack with all his strength, froze on the spot and swallowed subconsciously. Heaven End. Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself, the further use of the Heaven End's authority. The giant sword in the sky kept trembling, with a shrill buzz, like Li Kuangtu's angry roar. Li Tianlan, who was calm and indifferent, still raised his palm and casually held the hilt. In the blink of an eye, 2 giant swords of the same size, shape, and nature appeared in the forest. Because they were the same 9 Emptiness and Infinity, they were also controlling the same sword energy. And they were all controlled by Li Kuangtu. At this moment, Li Tianlan actually did nothing. He didn't control different sword energy, and he didn't use the same unique skill as Li Kuangtu. The giant sword of sword energy in his hand was completely controlled by Li Kuangtu. The only thing he did was to copy Li Kuangtu's sword. It was a flawless copy. Such a copy brought Li Kuangtu double the consumption, but the power of the sword energy was based on Li Tianlan's physical state at this time. The sword energy was even stronger than Li Kuangtu's original giant sword of sword energy. The hilt of the giant sword of sword energy was held in Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan's arm shook, and the billowing sword energy swept everything in the forest. The blade of the giant sword had smashed hard on Li Kuangtu's giant sword of sword energy. It was the most direct collision. It was also the most direct crushing. The sword energy collided head-on, and the powerful destructive force directly caused an extremely violent explosion in the air. Thunderbolts, raging fire, ice, and hurricane. Countless sword energy with pure energy raged wildly between heaven and earth. The giant sword of sword energy condensed by Li Kuangtu was smashed by a sword. The blinding sword light began to scatter, and with an incomparably dazzling light, it completely swallowed Li Kuangtu and Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu opened his own domain. A darkness completely enveloped him and Gu Xingyun. Li Kuangtu, Li Tianlan. The level of the sword of both sides was almost at the peak of the current dark world. Although Gu Xingyun had broken through, without his protection, he would definitely be injured in the aftermath of such sword energy, although he would not die. The dark domain continued to shrink, covering his and Gu Xingyun's bodies. The next second, the vast sword energy with the vast light formed a misty and tide-like shock wave, destroying all the surrounding matter in an instant. The deep pit torn by the sword energy expanded again and became a big pit with a diameter of nearly 2 kilometers in an instant. Water splashed out of the huge pit, and the sword energy full of destructive power continued to fluctuate. Jiang Shangyu's domain was constantly deformed and twisted, and the whole domain was constantly flying back under the shock wave. Jiang Shangyu expanded his domain to melt the sword energy, but his and Gu Xingyun's bodies were directly forced back nearly a kilometer in the strong shock wave. The forest had completely disappeared. The trees, the grass, and the fallen leaves were all smashed into ashes. The ashes fluttered in the air with the wind. The ground also disappeared. In the area of thousands of meters, there was only a deep pit still surging with water. The shock wave formed by the surging sword energy spread for thousands of meters, and the powerful force gradually disappeared as it continued to spread. But in the battlefield, countless sword energy were still entangled everywhere. The space that had been torn and healed again was twisted in the air, like patches sewn on the transparent air. The gushing blood seeped out of one of the patches and spilled into the lake that had not yet fully formed in the deep pit on the ground. A large amount of sword energy was entangled in that patch. Li Kuangtu's figure fell quickly in the entangled sword energy, and blood flowed. At the moment when he was about to fall into the deep pit, his whole body suddenly stopped and stood in the void. Blood surged from his body. Li Kuangtu's face was pale, and his body kept trembling. He seemed to want to make himself look calm, but his constantly twitching face fully showed the pain he was suffering at this time. He gritted his teeth and stood in the air, and even the most basic suspension was a little difficult. Who Who? In the sound of heavy breathing, Li Kuangde slowly raised his head and looked at the mottled space in front of him. In front of him, there was still a space patch where sword energy gathered, constantly fluctuating. He could feel that Li Tianlan was still inside. But his aura had become extremely weak. Li Kuangde twitched the corner of his mouth, and an extremely ferocious and painful but somewhat satisfied smile gradually appeared on his face. Li Tianlan's figure slowly walked out of that patch. There was still no sword formation. He was still barehanded. Blood was also flowing on Li Tianlan's body. His aura was very weak, but it was extremely calm. Li Kuangde's smile froze. He raised his head and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood steadily in the air. Bang! A violent heartbeat sounded directly. Li Tianlan's weak aura returned to its peak state in an instant. All the wounds on his body were completely healed. As he moved his body, a biting frost covered him. The pale frost was instantly dyed blood red. The frost absorbed the blood on his body and kept sliding down from his body. Li Tianlan, who had recovered, breathed a sigh of relief and whispered to himself, "Much better." No one knew how powerful his physical recovery and combat endurance were after the formation of the second heart. Even he couldn't believe such an increase. But at the same time, the formation of the second heart also greatly increased the load on his body. The increase in his appetite and his exuberant energy were just trivial matters. Every time the new heart beat extremely slowly, it would form an extremely powerful energy in Li Tianlan's body, which even his current body couldn't bear. When there was no battle, Li Tianlan could only torment Qin Weibai on the bed. But even if he vented dozens or hundreds of times in that way, a single beat of his new heart was enough to make his efforts completely go to waste. More and more energy was stored in his body, more and more. A large amount of energy continued to flow to a certain extent and began to strengthen his body. This feeling was not good. Li Tianlan even often felt that his body would be completely bursting with energy. He needed to fight. It was a high-quality battle. So he was very satisfied with Li Kuangde's sword, very satisfied. This sword brought him some injuries, but all the injuries were instantly repaired by the energy in his body, and the continued energy was finally vented a lot from the battle with the injuries. In Li Tianlan's words, this feeling was very comfortable. Li Kuangde's smile completely froze. His body stood in the air, tottering. At the same time, Xianxia's eyes also lit up. The domain around him completely disappeared. At this moment he was very sure that Li Tianlan had completely withdrawn from the real state, and his combat capability had returned to normal. Xianxia took a step forward and stepped out of his domain. His and Gu Xingyun's killing intent and hostility locked on Li Tianlan almost at the same time. Li Tianlan didn't even look at them. He just stared at Li Kuangde, who was covered in blood and seemed to be about to lose his balance. "This sword is for the Li family." Li Tianlan's voice was calm and indifferent. "Do you know your mistake?" Li Kuangde's face suddenly twisted and became extremely ferocious. The strong humiliation swallowed his reason, and his body trembled more and more obviously. "Ha ha ha ha!" In the violent trembling, Li Kuangde suddenly laughed wildly. His voice was hoarse and ferocious, with strong resentment. "I was wrong. My only mistake was that I didn't kill you as soon as possible, you little bastard." Boom! A round ripple suddenly appeared under Li Tianlan's feet. The incomparably heavy sword energy, like a mountain, directly pressed down on Li Kuangde. "You don't know what's good for you. Go to hell." Li Kuangde's arm shook and instantly made a seal. The infinite sword energy directly turned into a turbulent power at this moment. From top to bottom, from bottom to top, two opposite forces rushed to Li Tianlan at the same time, as if they wanted to crush him into a meat pie. The Milky Way seal. The battlefield shook violently. At the moment of another confrontation, Li Kuangde's eyes suddenly flashed with a bright light. Li Tianlan was indeed still in his peak state. But both the destructive power and the abundance of sword energy were obviously lower than before, returning to Li Kuangde's normal level of cognition. At the same time, two different kinds of dark domains spread over and enveloped Li Tianlan. The domains kept twisting and tearing Li Tianlan's body crazily. In the darkness, Li Tianlan's body was completely stretched to the limit. The dragon fist flew. Li Tianlan's speed accelerated in an instant. There were many shadows, and he almost stepped to the edge of the domain in one step. He waved his fist. Gu Xingyun's domain was shattered in an instant. The sword light bloomed in front of Li Tianlan, and all the twisted dark power in Jiang Shangyu's domain turned into nothingness under the sword light. Li Guangtu, who regained his confidence, suppressed his injury. Blood gathered in his hand, and a blood-red long sword took shape in his hand. His figure flashed, and he had appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan. The long sword swept across, and the blood-red sword energy rushed to Li Tianlan like a waning moon. The moment the waning moon lit up, Li Guangtu's figure had already come behind Li Tianlan. The sword energy was surging. Li Guangtu's figure was like a ghost, appearing in all directions almost at the same time. The overwhelming sword energy rushed out from all directions, trying to cut Li Tianlan's body. The blood-red sword light was mighty. Gu Xingyun's domain directly enveloped Li Guangtu and kept compressing around him. The domain was not shrinking. Li Guangtu's body seemed to be wearing a very close but extremely strong armor. This armor not only defended Li Tianlan, but also Jiang Shangyu. The blood-red sword energy that penetrated through the sky and earth kept bursting out. Jiang Shangyu had risen into the air and raised his hands high. His hands bent little by little as his body rose, as if he was grasping something extremely heavy with great caution. The space suddenly became extremely dull and silent. There was no need to say anything at all. Li Guangtu's sword light flashed, and his speed suddenly accelerated to the extreme. In an instant, countless Li Guangtu appeared in countless directions around Li Tianlan. One after another, blood-red sword light condensed wildly and shot toward Li Tianlan's body. Jiang Shangyu's body stiffened for a moment. His bent palms seemed to have finally grasped something, and his knuckles became stiff. Jiang Shangyu laughed. The dark domain opened up around him in an instant. Jiang Shangyu's hands suddenly pulled down. The sky above the battlefield was suddenly filled with a deafening roar of thunder. Jiang Shangyu seemed to tear a piece of the sky directly. As his hands fell down, the surging thunder fell with a loud bang. Hundreds of meters, thousands of meters, thousands of meters. The violent thunder light kept flying in the air, sweeping every inch of the surrounding space. In a scene like the end of the world, the thunder all over the sky attacked everything indiscriminately. Gu Xingyun was also attacking, but he was attacking Li Guangtu. The majestic power fell directly on Li Guangtu along with his attack. To be exact, it fell on the domain armor he created for Li Guangtu. The blood-red sword light was still flying between heaven and earth. In the sharp tearing sound, a sharp light that looked like a domain or a sword formation suddenly appeared around Li Guangtu. The unique technique of Kunlun City, 9th Secluded Impasse. This was the further deepening use of the unique technique of Kunlun City after Gu Xingyun broke through to the peak of the Invincible Realm. He covered Li Guangtu's body with his domain to form armor, providing the most basic defense strength and preventing Li Guangtu from being accidentally hurt by the thunder all over the sky. At the same time, this domain armor was also, in a sense, Gu Xingyun's clone. Gu Xingyun already had the ability to remotely control the clone to fight directly. Among the people present, Gu Xingyun's strength was undoubtedly the lowest, and he was the easiest to die. He was also the one that Li Tianlan couldn't kill the most. As the war god of Zhongzhou state, no matter how lawless Li Tianlan was, he couldn't directly kill Gu Xingyun in this situation. He could be said to be the safest. But this so-called safety only meant that Gu Xingyun wouldn't die. He had such a troublesome identity. If there was a chance, Li Tianlan would definitely give him a hard time and let him leave the battlefield with serious injuries in an instant. Therefore, Gu Xingyun did not get close to Li Guangtu at all. He wandered far away at the edge, turning his domain avatar into armor and merging with Li Guangtu. In this case, it was equivalent to him fighting side by side with Li Guangtu. The sword energy in the 9th Secluded Impasse was dense. This could be said to be a domain composed of sword energy, or a sword formation composed of domains. The cold sharpness burst out with the blood-red sword light. In the next second, the thunder all over the skies suddenly fell on the battlefield. The lightning fell on Li Kuangtu's domain armor. The domain armor suddenly burst out with a dark light. The sharpness of the ninth secluded impasse directly increased and began to change completely. 10th unique domain. The most powerful unique technique of Kunlun City directly enveloped Li Tianlan. In the next second, the blood-red sword light and the vast thunder poured into the 10th unique domain at the same time. The 10th unique domain suddenly shrank. The lightning, the sword energy, the domain, and everything burst out with Li Tianlan as the center when they were squeezed to the extreme. Collapse, expansion, tearing, twisting, explosion, entanglement. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, Gu Xingyun. Two experts who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. A top expert at the peak of the invincible realm. The energy reaction caused by the three people's complete cooperation made the whole battlefield extremely chaotic. No one could see where Li Tianlan was. There were only constantly twisting lights and shadows on the battlefield. The extremely strong destructive power and lethality kept surging in the air. The space was broken, and it had become an extremely pure dark void. There seemed to be endless light surging out of the void. They couldn't see anything. They couldn't feel anything. The only thing they could hear, it was a violent heartbeat with absolute vitality and vitality. Bang! The heartbeat was so strong that the sudden surging sound wave tore up all the lights and shadows in an instant. The surging power was completely suppressed in an instant. The mighty but invisible sword energy suddenly burst out in the center of the light and shadow. There was no light. There was only the surging sharpness between heaven and earth. The sharpness penetrated the space, and the transparent air was constantly folded at a speed visible to the naked eye. The feeling at this moment was simply indescribable. In the perception of Jiang Shangyu and the others, as the space was constantly folded in the sharpness, they were getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan, while Li Tianlan was getting farther and farther away from them. It was a very clear and real contradiction. The sharpness was vast and mighty in every corner that could be perceived. The space folded one layer, the second layer, the third layer, the infinite folding, the infinite collapse. The whole battlefield became dark in an instant. It was like the arrival of the eternal night. In the eternal darkness, the pure black sword light, like a vast ocean, broke out completely. 24 moves of sword, break of reincarnation. The world seemed to recover its essence in an instant. It was quiet, dead silence. The black sword light was vast and mighty without a sound. It was endless darkness. At the same time, it was like a completely silent ocean. The indescribable grandeur and majesty, with pure destructive power, spread from all directions through the constantly folded space. Jiang Shangyu's expression changed dramatically. This sword intent, he was the unknown of the shadow camp. He was the unknown of the shadow camp. This kind of sword intent was completely strange to him. He had never experienced the era of the rise of the god of war and the human emperor, but it did not mean that he could not see the ultimate direction represented by this sword light. Li Tianlan was far from being able to exert the power of the breaking of reincarnation, but he had vaguely touched a trace of the essence of this sword. The ultimate direction of this sword was, there was no time to think. Jiang Shangyu suddenly waved his hand. One after another, domains appeared in front of the ocean of eternal darkness. Countless domains began to condense crazily. There was no intention of attacking at all. Defense. Jiang Shangyu was desperately defending. The dark and deathly still ocean surged over. It looked slow, but it seemed to be extremely fast. In an instant, one domain after another began to shatter soundlessly. Li Kuangtu, whose face was pale, instantly made a seal. All the defensive means in the immortality seal followed Jiang Shangyu's domain and formed several consecutive defensive sword formations. The moment the sword formations appeared, they were completely shattered. The indescribable silent darkness spread with an unstoppable determination. It tore everything apart, shattered everything, and destroyed everything. It was truly invincible and unbreakable. Any matter in front of it was shattered. Sword light, domain, and all the defense and offense did not cause any reaction from the darkness. It was just pure destruction and destruction. Wherever the darkness passed, all their struggles and efforts turned into nothingness without any stagnation. Jiang Shangyu's face was pale. He suddenly gritted his teeth and roared, "Retreat into the village!" The three of them retreated quickly. The darkness accelerated as they retreated. It spread with great determination, covering the whole battlefield, and then the forest on the edge of the battlefield. A large area of the forest silently turned into powder in the mighty sharpness. The sword light tore up all the lawns and ground outside the village. After Jiang Shangyu and the other two entered the village, the whole village suddenly burst into an illusory light. The illusory light was instantly shattered by the dark sword energy. The shield of the whole village was broken without any hesitation. The sun, hanging over the village, emitted extremely cold sunlight at the same time. The sunlight was melted by the darkness. The sun was covered by the darkness at the same time. This was really covering the sky and the sun. When the last ray of sunlight dissolved in the darkness, the sun hidden in the darkness completely burst out, with an extremely cold flowing fire. The dazzling light stirred wildly, entangling with the dark sword light. The darkness and the sun exploded at the same time. There was an earth-shattering noise in the silent world. The sun began to explode. The whole village was completely torn apart by the sharpness. The sword light was surging, and the huge impact swept Jiang Shangyu and the other two from the end of the village to the end. Li Kuangtu looked dispirited. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun stood there straight. Their bodies were stiff, and they looked at it expressionlessly. Crack, countless fine sounds rang out in Gu Xingyun's body. A large mouthful of blood sprayed directly from Jiang Shangyu's mouth. He suddenly knelt on one knee on the ground, breathing rapidly, and his eyes were confused and shocked. The darkness that swept the whole village disappeared. Countless villagers appeared on the street and stood in front of Jiang Shangyu and the other two, who were exhausted on the ground. Everyone looked ahead expressionlessly. Everyone's expression and eyes were the same. Tap, light footsteps could be heard. The space shook slightly. Li Tianlan, with a calm expression, seemed to have stepped into reality from nothingness. His aura was still as strong as ever, and his entire body was clean, without a single scar on it. Hundreds of strange villagers blocked his way. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth, and his eyes fell directly on Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu in the back. "Ants," Li Tianlan said calmly and blandly. Chapter 1167. The faces of Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, and Gu Xingyun twisted at the same time. Jiang Shangyu slowly raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He gritted his teeth and said in a hoarse voice, "Do you really think you are invincible in the world?" "I am invincible in the world," Li Tianlan said lightly. Li Kuangtu gritted his teeth, and the corner of his mouth was bleeding. The greatest humiliation in the world might be to tell the truth. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were in a trance for a moment, and he didn't speak for a while. Li Tianlan just stood there quietly, calm and collected. His breath was steady, without a sharp edge or an invincible aura. But his figure was constantly merging with the figure in Jiang Shangyu's memory, and eventually, they were inseparable. It was an indescribable quiet temperament, an indescribable calmness, and an incomprehensible calmness. Indifferent, quiet, and peaceful. His heart was as still as water, and he was invincible in the world. The figure in his memory gradually became clear, and it was inseparable from Li Tianlan. That was the figure that occupied all the lights of an era. That was the figure that could overturn the entire dark world by himself. That was the figure that made countless masters in the world silent. That was the figure that made his father dig out his heart in order to protect the Jiang family. Invincible, cold, brutal, and irresistible, Dongqing Huangtu's figure. Dongqing Huangtu Li Tianlan. Two identical shadows seemed to begin to merge in Jiang Shangyu's memory for the first time. Jiang Shangyu slowly stood up. Fresh blood was still flowing from his body, and the dark red and shocking liquid was silently stained with wisps of dark color. "It's not over yet," Jiang Shangyu said flatly. "Is this idiot crazy?" As Li Tianlan merged with the real environment, the chaotic rules of the twisted jungle completely dissipated. On the virtual screen, the original dark and messy light and shadow finally showed one picture after another. Xianyuan Wushang and Lin Shi were sitting together. Behind them were Xing Tian, Saint, and Apostle. The virtual screen stood in the air, extremely clear, and looked like a three-dimensional 4D movie. "Isn't it over long ago?" Xianyuan Wushang's voice continued. "What else can he fight for? It's probably his current base." Lin Shi held his chin with one hand and said casually, "Then, the souls of these villagers are in a distorted state. This is also one of Jiang Shangyu's trump cards." Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a moment, then said calmly, "That's not a bad thing." Lin Shi smiled. "Maybe Jiang Shangyu thinks so too." The current situation was an opportunity for Li Tianlan. Wasn't it also an opportunity for Jiang Shangyu? If they could kill each other today, then no matter who it was, there would be countless troubles and disputes in the future. Compared with that prospect, it was understandable for Jiang Shangyu to give up the base to have a taste. It's just that his chances of winning are negligible. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head and waved his hand. The scene on the screen began to replay. The layers of folded space and the darkness that resembled an eternal night once again appeared on the screen. Lin Shi watched quietly. Xianyuan Wushang was also watching quietly. "Broken reincarnation," Xianyuan Wushang whispered to himself. His Majesty has already grasped the essence of breaking reincarnation. Lin Shi's voice was very calm. As the pinnacle of martial arts in the realm of war gods, breaking reincarnation was truly famous in the starry sky. Among the people present, only Lin Shi, the son of the god of war, was qualified to comment on it. "No wonder," Xianyuan Wushang smiled gently. "I once heard from my father that the god of war was the most promising person to approach his realm in the shortest time. He refused to touch any other authority. Until now, I really understand." As the sharpest peak figure of the human clan, breaking reincarnation had appeared more than once in the starry sky. But how powerful was the god of war? The sword light of breaking reincarnation in his hand could be said to be truly endless. It could easily cover an entire galaxy. The energy reaction that broke through the limit could not be analyzed at all. But the breaking reincarnation in Li Tianlan's hand was extremely clear. He didn't return. This move of breaking reincarnation in the real environment made them vaguely aware of the direction that the god of war was pursuing. So what His Majesty the God of War is doing now is not meaningless, right? Xianyuan Wushang suddenly said. Lin Shi nodded. "It's not a secret, at least Great Emperor Xianyuan knows." Xianyuan Wushang was silent. The war had swept across the starry sky. Most people in the corridor of time and space were fighting. But no one was fighting for victory. The human clan could not be a match for the Order Camp or the Dark Shadow. The end and destruction were. The inevitable ending. Great Emperor Xianyuan, the human sovereign, the god of war's realm, all the nobles, ministers, ordinary elites, including Xianyuan Wushang and Lin Shi, no one could escape. This was the end that could not be avoided. And in the war before the end, many people just chose to wait. For example, the human sovereign of the imperial palace. For example, the elder princess Feng Qingwu of the corridor of time and space. For example, many people. There was no need for them to take action, because the ending could not be changed. In the whole war, the only one who needed to take action was Great Emperor Xianyuan, and only Great Emperor Xianyuan. He needed enough order substance and dark shadow substance to go to the end of the world before the war ended and end everything with his own hands. But under such circumstances, the god of war was still supporting the corridor of time and space. The black sea of sword energy was sweeping across the star areas. He was fighting this war very seriously. Only now did Xianyuan Wushang understand. The god of war did not end. He gave up on reincarnation and other authorities. He also did not consider what Great Emperor Xianyuan would do after entering the world's end. Because of break reincarnation, the god of war would always be Lin Xianyuan. If it succeeds, Xianyuan Wushang murmured softly, his eyes dazed. If it succeeds, Father will obtain part of the authority of hope. Break reincarnation will become the sword of hope for the human clan. Lin Shi smiled softly. Respectable and fearsome. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a while before saying softly, Your Majesty, the god of war, is worthy of the title of one of the strongest pillars of the human clan. Unfortunately, break reincarnation only applies to Father and His Majesty Li Tianlan. Lin Shi shook his head regretfully. The other peak figures of the neutral faction still need to touch other authorities. There were many authorities in the starry sky. Martial artists, scholars, calligraphers, even rulers, demons, all of them had different levels of authority. There was only one way for those who had reached the peak of a certain level to touch upon other levels of authority. That was reincarnation. The god of war, Lin Xianyuan, refused reincarnation and focused on the authority of martial arts. Once Li Tianlan returned, he would no longer need reincarnation to touch other authorities. His Majesty Li Tianlan has touched the essence of break reincarnation. Lin Shi smiled and said, I can tell Father. Next, Father will talk to His Majesty Li Tianlan personally. Chapter 1168. If the god of war can succeed, Xianyuan Wushang's eyes were in a trance. He said with some longing, Then after this is over, the situation of the human clan will be much better. Lin Shi was still staring at the virtual screen in front of him. His natural eyes moved slightly, and every detail of the battlefield was imprinted in his eyes. He nodded slightly and then slowly shook his head. The premise is that His Majesty Li Tianlan can return smoothly before this is over. Otherwise, it's meaningless. No matter how strong my father is, he can't do it alone. As he spoke, he took a serious look at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang remained calm and said calmly, There is a great hope. Li Tianlan's return was now the top priority of the cloister of time and space. Although Lin Shi was also here, he was just a bystander. No one outside the cloister of time and space was qualified to interfere with Li Tianlan's return process. This was the obligation and responsibility of the cloister of time and space. No one knew how many plans the cloister of time and space had made for Li Tianlan's return and how many resources it had consumed. No one knew if there was a deviation in those plans. As Li Tianlan's guide, Xianyuan Wushang knew a little, but he couldn't tell Lin Shi these details. If His Majesty can kill Xianxia today, will it speed up the return process? Lin Shi probed with a calm and collected voice. This question is meaningless. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and said calmly. In their cognition, the energy state of the combination of Wuqing and Worryless was enough to pose an absolutely fatal threat to Xianxia without alarming the unknown on him. But now the situation was obvious. Lord Wei failed. The reason for the failure was unknown. This was not even a matter of failure. Half of the divine form was temporarily separated from Lord Wei, which alarmed Li Tianlan. The most likely explanation was that Lord Wei was forced to reveal his form of order in the chaotic order. In their cognition, this was almost impossible for Xianxia to do. But if it was the unknown who did it, the miracle city still existed. No one could understand the reason. The battlefield between Lord Wei and Xianxia was full of chaotic rules. They didn't dare to alarm the unknown, so they naturally didn't dare to peek. Only after Li Tianlan completely turned the surroundings into a real environment could they see the current situation of the battlefield. No one knew what had happened before except for Xianxia and Lord Wei. But it was certain that Lord Wei did not kill Xianxia. So, in Li Tianlan's current state, there was not much hope that he could kill Xianxia today. Xianxia's problem needs to be reanalyzed. Xianyuan Wushang's voice was cold. I hope your report will show what the space-time cloister wants to see. I know what to do. Lin Shi shook his head helplessly. It was the war god world and the mortal imperial palace's mistake. Without a doubt, the stronger Xianxia was in this space-time corridor, the more trouble the war god world and the mortal imperial palace would have to face. If he doesn't die this time, my main goal is to deal with Jiang Shangyu. Lin Shi said. Shenyuan Wushang remained indifferent. The apostle sitting behind Lin Shi suddenly waved his hand. A faint blue electric current shot out from his fingertip and landed on the virtual screen in front of them. The virtual screen shook slightly. In an instant, it seemed to form an independent space parallel to this world. Li Tianlan, Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, Li Kuangdu, the broken battlefield, the collapsed village, and the weird villagers all looked very real on the screen. The faint blue light kept wandering in the space of the screen. All the villagers were connected by the electric light in an instant. The electric light continued to fly. When it approached Li Tianlan, it was reflected back to Jiang Shangyu. Then it was reflected back by Jiang Shangyu. Then it fell on Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun. The electric light flashed in the apostle's eyes. The voice of the intelligence center sounded in everyone's ears. Do you want to analyze the target and implement order on the target? Saint did not hesitate to confirm the instruction. Another virtual screen lit up in front of them. The weird villagers, Li Kuangtu, Gu Xingyun, after all the detectable targets were ordered, the data began to be arranged in front of them one by one. Special energy detected. Target cannot be analyzed. Chaotic energy detected. Target cannot be analyzed. Neutral energy detected. Analysis completed. Dark shadow energy detected. Analysis completed. A lot of data flashed quickly on the virtual screen. Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu could not analyze it. So the data of Li Kuangtu and Gu Xingyun became more important reference data in this war. Target identity, Li Kuangtu male neutral creature. Authority, martial artist level 3. 9 life strength, low, amplified by the real environment, middle low level, hidden injury state. Life strength is extremely low weak. Combat strength, low, elite level, amplified by the real environment. Real environment internal strength, extremely high, weakness, X, natural enemy, not locked. Combat strength, 31,000, amplified by the real environment, power, 670, amplified by the real environment, agility, 710, amplified by the real environment, physical strength, 2050, amplified by the real environment, spirit, 530, amplified by the real environment, intelligence, 286, amplified by the real environment, exclusive, non-critical hit rate, 5%, amplified by the real environment, critical hit rate increased by 100%, current critical hit rate, 10% speed, 500, amplified by the real environment. Critical hit damage, 30%, amplified by the real environment, authority breakdown, martial artist, sword way characteristics, chase, increase speed by 15%, attack speed by 30%. Thunder, increase critical hit rate by 50% within 10 seconds, increase critical hit damage by 20%. Intermediate penetration, attack has a 3% chance of ignoring target's defense. Tenacity, life strength recovery speed plus 60%, defense plus 500. Hatred, attack power increase by 80%, attack speed increase by 20%. Amplified by the real environment, all characteristic effects increased by 150%. Unique skill, 24 moves of sword, incomplete. Mastery progress 30%, not mastered 24 moves of sword. Current evaluation, low. 24 moves of sword overall evaluation, peak. Immortal seal, evaluation, mid-level unique skill. Low-level martial arts, folded. Divine weapon, none. Gu Xingyun, male creature, neutral, affected by the shadow rule. Authority, martial artist level 3. 5, affected by the shadow, life strength, low, medium, unable to lock. Combat strength, 0, medium, unable to lock. Natural enemy, not locked. Combat strength sad face amplified by the real environment, amplified by the shadow environment. Warning, unknown changes in the target, suppressed by the real environment. Warning, unknown changes in the target, amplified by the shadow environment, suppressed by the real environment. Warning, current combat strength of the target has exceeded the limit. Warning, Current combat strength of the target is 0, warning. Clap. Xianyuan Wushang waved his hand expressionlessly, and the data analysis screen in front of him suddenly disappeared and shattered. What kind of nonsense is this? He reached out his hand and rubbed his forehead. Gu Xingyun has just accepted the shadow rule, but he hasn't completely transformed it, so now there is still a bit of real shadow coexisting with the shadow on him, which can't be analyzed for the time being. When he stabilizes, I will follow up and observe. Saint smiled helplessly. But Li Kuangtu's data is very clear, which is an important reference. In the real environment, Li Kuangtu at his peak should be stronger than Jiang Shangyu at his normal state. Judging from Li Kuangtu's data performance, in this battle, the possibility of His Majesty Li Tianlan killing the three of them is very high. This is just an analysis of combat strength. Xianyuan Wushang glanced at the apostle. Jiang Shangyu's combat strength is low, but it doesn't mean that he has few tricks if Big Brother doesn't succeed in keeping him. Then it's my turn. Lin Shi said calmly. The apostle has temporarily locked on Jiang Shangyu. If he can really escape from His Majesty Li Tianlan, as long as he leaves that base, I will try to kill Jiang Shangyu by force. Chapter 1169. It's not over yet. Jiang Shangyu's voice was so light that it seemed to be a murmur without any emotion. But as his voice sounded, the villagers gathered in the whole village seemed to have received an irresistible order at the same time, and their bodies moved at the same time. In an instant, there was a kind of chaos in the positions of all the villagers, which made people extremely uncomfortable. The villagers' movements were not to attack, but to move a little irregularly. Some people went left, some went right, some went forward, some went back, and some even turned their backs to Li Tianlan. Everyone's movements were not uniform, and the distance they moved was even more chaotic. But as they did not move uniformly, hundreds of villagers suddenly became a strange formation that was too complicated to study. Li Tianlan's brows furrowed tightly. He took a deep look at the villagers who were standing in a chaotic position, and his body slowly rose into the air. The positions of the villagers became clearer when he looked at them from a high place. All kinds of negative emotions began to appear in Li Tianlan's consciousness for no reason. Seeing this formation, Li Tianlan instinctively had an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Li Tianlan's eyes slowly shifted and fell on Jiang Shangyu. He could feel that at the first moment when this strange formation was formed, it seemed that every villager had a vague connection with Jiang Shangyu. Every villager seemed to be no longer an independent individual, but a marionette in Jiang Shangyu's hands. The indescribable strange feeling grew stronger and stronger. Hundreds of villagers began to raise their heads at the same time, staring at Li Tianlan with dull eyes. Men and women, old and young, every villager showed a very strange smile on their faces at the same time. What are these things? Li Tianlan asked faintly. He seemed to have lost the emotion of fear in his consciousness. Absolute confidence made his will indestructible. In this era, no matter where he was, no matter what situation he faced, and no matter what enemy he faced, he firmly believed that he was truly invincible in the world. These? Jiang Shangyu stared at Li Kuangtu. There was a very strange dark red in his eyes. Do you remember our appointment in Xianyuan City not long ago? Jiang Shangyu's deep voice sounded with a strange tone. Do you remember how you defeated me at that time? Li Tianlan frowned. It had only been less than a month since his duel with Jiang Shangyu. In that duel, he strictly limited a wisp of his sword energy to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. He twisted the sword energy to the extreme and burst out thousands of times in an instant. Unfortunately, he still failed to kill Jiang Shangyu. It's all because of the inspiration you gave me. Jiang Shangyu muttered to himself. His body was also rising slowly, and his smile was getting more and more sinister. You're asking what these things are? Hee, they are my warriors. Jiang Shangyu whispered. It's all me. Jiang Shangyu raised his palm. All the villagers raised their hands at the same time. Boom. Boundless darkness replaced the space in an instant. Domain. Everywhere was a completely boiling domain that was about to explode. Jiang Shangyu's aura rose to the extreme in an instant. The domain exploded from his hands, from the hands of every villager. All of them were domains with the same power. Hundreds of domains surged. How similar was this scene to the duel between the two of them not long ago? But at that time, Li Tianlan limited his sword energy to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and twisted thousands of times in an instant. But at this moment, Jiang Shangyu limited every domain to the invincible realm. Through hundreds of villagers, he released hundreds of domains in an instant. The domains rose and fell, and the darkness swallowed everything. Standing in the center of the darkness, Li Tianlan was completely besieged by hundreds of invincible realm experts at the same time. This was a combat method that maximized combat power without breaking through the real environment. Li Tianlan used it once. Jiang Shangyu learned it without hesitation. Jiang Shangyu kept releasing domains from his hands. His body began to crack in the shortest time, and blood flowed out of his body wildly. Li Tianlan suppressed the sword light to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and could twist thousands of times. Because only by suppressing the sword light to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm could his physical strength at that time barely withstand that kind of extreme outbreak. Here, in the base that Jiang Shangyu had run for many years, his physical strength was stronger than in the real environment, and these villagers were also his trump card. His outbreak this time was equivalent to letting these villagers who had been eroded by the shadow share the physical burden with him. Such a method was almost impossible to replicate, but in his expectation, it was enough to cause a fatal threat to Li Tianlan. Hundreds of invincible realm experts joined forces. Although this kind of power only lasted for a moment, it was enough to destroy the world. Since the emergence of the martial arts realm from the four realms of martial arts to the invincible realm, there might not be hundreds of invincible realm experts in the whole dark world for hundreds of years. What such power meant was self-evident. Hundreds of domains continued to spread and connect. The bright sky on the battlefield was instantly replaced by the extreme night. The domains were completely connected, but they did not form a whole. Instead, they became a curtain of night with hundreds of core points. At the same time, Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu all got up, condensed their strongest power into a blow at all costs, and rushed to Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu snapped his fingers. Under the curtain of night, the core points of hundreds of domains twisted to the extreme in an instant. Heaven and earth rumbled. It was earth-shattering and earth-shattering. Extreme darkness surged crazily, and all the domains exploded at the same time. The overwhelming destructive power completely drowned Li Tianlan in the blink of an eye. The bodies of all the villagers were pulverized the moment the domain exploded, turning into countless viscous liquids and chunks of flesh. The black tide that seemed to be able to destroy everything spread as much as possible. Some laws of physics seemed to have been quietly modified. The black tide that exploded out was confined to a certain area. The shockwave that spread out from the explosion began to return the moment it reached the edge of the area and continued to hit the center of the darkness. No one could see Li Tianlan in the center of the darkness. No one knew his condition. No one even knew if he was dead or alive. Until a faint blue light flickered in the darkness. The blue electric light disappeared. An extremely powerful beam of sword light shot out. It exploded in the darkness. It was not a thunderous sword energy. Instead, it was an incomparably dazzling ray of pure light. Jiang Shangyu's face changed dramatically in an instant. The moment the blue sword light disappeared, the power of the sword light hidden by the darkness increased rapidly. Thunder-shocking realm, peak of thunder-shocking realm, half-step invincible realm. He rushed over all the thresholds. The extremely pure sword light was the real sword energy of the invincible realm. In Jiang Shangyu's knowledge, Li Tianlan's physical strength could not withstand the sword energy. The huge heartbeat beat rapidly in the darkness, resounding through heaven and earth. That seemingly incomparably weak pure light distorted thousands of times in an instant. The shining and brilliant waves of sword light suddenly burst out in the darkness. In a dark domain, the endless light was like a completely burning star, dispelling everything in an instant. Endless light kept flying. Every ray of light was the sword energy of the invincible realm. Without hesitation, Jiang Shangyu turned around and grabbed Jiang Shangyu, who was closest to him. His palm continued to move forward, trying to grab Li Kuangtu on the other side. At the same time, he roared, "Retreat!" Li Kuangtu's arm stretched out. Jiang Shangyu grabbed it. The shining sword light that could pierce through everything appeared beside Jiang Shangyu. The extremely bright sword light twisted again the moment it touched Jiang Shangyu. The sword light in different directions instantly merged into one and burst out directly beside Jiang Shangyu. Humph! Jiang Shangyu suddenly let out a miserable groan with endless pain. Dark red blood with a tinge of black suddenly sprayed out. Jiang Shangyu's arm was completely cut off without any pause under the twisted sword light. That was the arm that grabbed Li Kuangtu's arm. Jiang Shangyu's figure quickly faded in the sword light and disappeared at the same time as Gu Xingyun. Only the arm that grabbed Li Kuangtu and Li Kuangtu remained. Countless sword lights instinctively gathered around Li Kuangtu after losing their target. The dense chill froze Li Kuangtu's body, and the sharp light shot straight. Li Kuangtu looked calm in the face of the sword light that was enough to destroy him dozens of times in a short time. He stubbornly made an enemy of Emperor Dong's palace and had long thought of a similar situation. The sword light was getting closer and closer. The light was reflected in his pupils, extremely cold. Li Kuangtu suddenly smiled. He felt that this was the last expression he left to the world. But in the next second, a bloody arm that even revealed some white bones appeared directly in front of Li Kuangtu, grabbed his neck, and lifted him up. All the sword lights seemed to have found a home and continued to merge with the arm, eventually disappearing without a trace. The arm, which was full of blood and wounds, grabbed Li Kuangtu's neck and trembled slightly because of the sharp pain. The heartbeat sounded again. A large number of wounds on the arm began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Li Kuangtu opened his eyes. In his line of sight was an extremely pale but still expressionless face, dignified and biting cold. That was Li Tianlan's face. He pinched Li Kuangtu's neck with one hand and looked straight into his eyes. There was still no emotion in his tone, calm and indifferent. "Do you know your mistake?" Chapter 1170. The virtual screen shook violently under the impact of the sword energy and the domain. The apostle closed his eyes as soon as Li Tianlan escaped. He didn't even have time to look at Li Tianlan's injury, but began to sense Li Tianlan's current position without hesitation. The unknown was with Jiang Shangyu. This also meant that Jiang Shangyu was now considered half a shadow creature. Jiang Shangyu in this state was actually very bitter. Because of the influence of the shadow, he was no longer purely real. Of course, even if he was still a real creature, with Li Tianlan's suppression, he couldn't do anything. The most important thing was that Jiang Shangyu couldn't be considered a complete and absolute shadow creature now. No matter what secrets there were, this fact would not be changed. This also meant that he, who wasn't a complete shadow creature, would also be greatly restricted in the real environment. He could survive Li Tianlan's attack and escape from the battlefield. For this, the two princes from the time corridor and the war god's realm had some mental preparation. But Jiang Shangyu couldn't be like Li Tianlan, occasionally ignoring the distance at critical moments and crossing thousands of kilometers in one step. In this battle, he did have the ability to shuttle. Because the battlefield was his base. He shuttled to escape from his own base. So the destination of the shuttle would inevitably be his other base. What the apostle had to do now was to lock onto Jiang Shangyu's position, interrupt his progress while he was shuttling, and kill him halfway. Otherwise, once Jiang Shangyu entered his base, they would be afraid to attack again. An expanse of virtual lines immediately connected with the room's virtual screen. With the virtual screen as the center, countless virtual lines frantically spread outwards. The apostle activated his own authority, and in just a few short seconds, a network space that completely overlapped with the real world was established. This was undoubtedly a power that surpassed the real environment. The malice of the world surged. In the apostle's network space, all kinds of equipment he deliberately set up were constantly damaged and constantly replenished. The apostle's face turned from pale to deathly pale, and his body began to quickly become virtual, merging into his network world. In less than half a second of time, the apostle directly produced hundreds of thousands of thought centers in his own network world, all of them within large amounts of thoughts. The centers merged with his own thoughts, and there was no distinction between them. The malice of the world rushed into the network world, countless thought centers instantly destroyed, the apostle's own thoughts fleeing in a sorry state. Under the starry sky, among the authorizations that spanned across the three major factions, only 1.5 authorizations were close to omniscient and omnipotent. Half was an unknown that could not be understood at the moment. Relying on the law of chaos, he was omniscient and omnipotent to a certain extent. The other one refers to Doomsday, who stands at the peak of order, as the destroyer and scientist of the stars. However, the apocalypse relied on its own foundation and the various technological devices it had developed to simulate all kinds of authority, infinitely approaching true omniscience and omnipotence. Even though apostles couldn't do this, if they let go of their misgivings, to a certain extent, they could indeed do many things others couldn't. He was searching for Xianxia, which obviously would not be interfered with by Feng Qinggu, so he only needed to resist the backfire of the world's malice. Although he could only resist for a short time, a few seconds were enough for him to complete the operation. Xianyuan Wuxiang didn't pay attention to the apostle. He just looked at Li Tianlan through the shaking virtual screen. He, who didn't know enough about ruthless, felt the weakness of ruthless energy. Obviously, he had some misgivings, so in the real battle, he didn't use ruthless at all. He had been fighting with his bare hands. Jiang Shangyu's last blow was obviously a little unexpected, and Li Tianlan's counterattack was also beyond Jiang Shangyu's expectation. So Jiang Shangyu had an arm cut off. And Li Tianlan himself was also in a mess. But a considerable part of the reason for Li Tianlan's current mess and injury came from himself, not from his opponent. Even if he entered the invincible realm, even if he had a second heart, it was still a bit difficult for Li Tianlan to instantly twist the invincible realm sword energy thousands of times. The second heart could provide unimaginable energy endlessly, which could ensure that Li Tianlan's body wouldn't collapse. But after all, his physical strength was still limited, so the moment he attacked, he was already completely injured. If he didn't have a second heart, this degree of injury was even enough to threaten Li Tianlan's foundation. And now, Li Tianlan's injury still couldn't be healed in a short time. It would take about 7 more heartbeats for his injury to go from serious to light. But while 7 heartbeats provided a lot of vitality, it would also continue to damage Li Tianlan's body. But this injury was nothing at all. This kind of injury was nothing at all. After 7 heartbeats, in about a day, even if he was slightly injured, his combat capability would return to its peak level. Those minor injuries were nothing more than the fact that his physical strength was temporarily unable to control the second heart stably. Xianyuan Wuxiang was relieved and suddenly smiled. He showed mercy to Li Guangtu. Even in the last outbreak, those twisted sword lights avoided Li Guangtu as much as possible. If not, Li Guangtu would have died several times in this battle. After a pause, Xianyuan Wuxiang continued, "Big Brother is still too kind." Saint, who was sitting behind, suddenly burst out laughing. She couldn't be considered a stunning beauty. Her appearance was relatively ordinary, but she was full of charm, and her smile was extraordinarily charming. Xianyuan Wuxiang glanced at her, a little speechless. Saint barely stopped laughing and his face turned red. Li Tianlan was too kind, that was definitely a bad joke. Whether it was Her Majesty Huang Shi at the beginning or His Majesty East Emperor now, they didn't seem to have anything to do with kindness. The former was a tyrant feared by all races in the starry sky, and he had even destroyed a whole star zone with his own hands, not even leaving a speck of dust. Now, Li Tianlan had also slaughtered his enemies. Kindness? What did it have to do with Li Tianlan? Whether it was Her Majesty Huang Shi at the beginning or Li Tianlan now, his gentleness was always to the people around him, and his righteousness always existed in the whole camp. Facing the enemy, every peak existence had the same character, which was absolute brutality. Xianyuan Wuxiang still wanted to say something. As soon as he opened his mouth, countless virtual lines in the whole room suddenly lit up. In the dense network space, a certain node was completely replaced by a small red. Lin Shi, who had been quiet, suddenly stood up. In the process of standing up, his whole body had been completely virtualized and turned into a group of data. Before Lin Shi could stand up straight, his whole body had quickly disappeared from the room. The next second, all the virtual lines disappeared. The apostle's figure reappeared. He sat down on his seat, breathing heavily with large mouthfuls of air. Li Kuangtu, the apostle gasped and whispered, "After all, he is that person's biological father." Chapter 1171. The world was chaotic, and so was distance. A large number of images flashed thousands of times in less than a second. The ocean floating on the top of the mountain ignited in the turbulent waves. The dark sky suddenly became dazzling. The dead corpses gave birth to deformed babies. A large number of figures ran forward and retreated frantically. The strange monsters filled their bodies with heads and arms. The huge tree twisted and grew, and pairs of densely packed eyes grew out of it. The scorching sun slowly went down in the sky. The white clouds floated in front of them. The sky was completely replaced by the earth, with endless depression. The order was completely chaotic, and the rules never existed. The world was upside down at any time. This was the world of the dark shadow. Time, space, rules, everything was not completely opposite, but chaos, endless, without rules and without rules. Gu Xingyun, who was covered in blood, was grabbed by Jiang Shangyu and walked through the chaotic world. Countless scenes surged towards him, and he wasn't even sure if he was in a peculiar space or if he was passing through these scrolls of paintings. He was seriously injured, but compared with Li Kuangtu and Jiang Shangyu, who were not saved, his injury was the lightest. At this time, he was very conscious. His clear consciousness was currently undergoing incomparably cruel torture in this strange darkness and chaos. Gu Xingyun felt like a rag doll held in Jiang Shangyu's hand. Obviously, the two of them were running wildly in the darkness at the same time, but in his feeling he seemed to have become Jiang Shangyu's puppet, and his every move was controlled. Countless scenes flashed before his eyes. In Gu Xingyun's sight, there was a bloody castle. In front of the castle was a broken flagpole. The flagpole seemed to be very close to them, only more than 10 meters away, but Gu Xingyun was very sure that Jiang Shangyu took him to run for at least half a minute. But the flagpole was not getting closer, but getting farther and farther away from them. Gu Xingyun finally couldn't help but speak. His voice instantly turned into countless broken and vague syllables in this dark and chaotic world, so that people couldn't hear the specific content at all. Jiang Shangyu took another step forward. Everything around them flew back in an instant. The castle and the flagpole had completely disappeared, and a sea of blood had appeared under their feet. Jiang Shangyu's body relaxed a little, and a relaxed smile appeared on his face. "We're safe," he said slowly. His voice also turned into a large number of broken syllables, but when it fell into Gu Xingyun's ears, the meaning was clear. The blood-colored ocean undulated under his feet. Jiang Shangyu stood on the sea and looked back in the direction where they had escaped. That place was already an empty space. The indifference and gloom in Jiang Shangyu's eyes flashed away. Then he grabbed Gu Xingyun and stepped forward. The boundless sea of blood was instantly split apart. In the next second, all the illusory scenes disappeared. The sound became clearer. The distance became accurate. His cognition returned to normal. All around him was the sound of the waves. In the distance, seagulls flew across the sky. The setting sun slowly sank into the horizon. The incomparably dazzling light shone on the surface of the sea. The waves sparkled, and the entire sea was sparkling. There was soft sand under his feet. In front of him was the coast, and not far behind him was a forest and a mountain range. Gu Xingyun stared blankly at the setting sun that was about to sink into the sea. Where is this? It was still morning in Nanyun. Gu Xingyun was very sure that he and Jiang Shangyu had only escaped for a few minutes at most in that strange space. But when they came out of that space, it was already dusk in the outside world. There were only two possibilities. The first was that the flow of time in that escape space was not consistent with that of the outside world. This sounded like a science fiction story. The second possibility was the easiest to explain, which was the time difference. The time difference here was completely different from that in Nanyun. It was still morning in Nanyun, but it was already dusk here. But there was a time difference of nearly 12 hours, which meant that they were extremely far away. Could it be that they had appeared on the other side of the Earth in just a few minutes? This seemed to only mean that the distance in that escape space was different from that of the outside world. This was even more King fantastic. Gu Xingyun shook his head. When he was about to speak, he suddenly heard Jiang Shangyu's slightly confused low roar, CK. What's wrong? Gu Xingyun was stunned. Jiang Shangyu looked around with a gloomy face. Of course, he knew where he was. To be exact, it was near a naval base in the South American province of Gerda and Chol. It was occupied by the Navy and was not a tourist attraction, so it looked extremely deserted. But the problem was that Jiang Shangyu didn't want to come here. His destination was a cave near the center of the mountain range, far away from the coast in front of him. Going down from that cave, he could reach a secret underground base. That place was also his second base, and also the destination of his escape. However, the current location was at least 200 kilometers away from his destination. The essence of the shadow was chaos. But chaos did not mean that it was inaccurate. It was the first time that Jiang Shangyu had encountered such a situation. Let's go. Jiang Shangyu took a deep breath, and his voice was low and dignified. He grabbed Gu Xingyun's palm again. He was seriously injured at this time, and he was far away from his base, so he had no ability to travel again. If he wanted to go to the second base, the only choice was to walk. The rules of the shadow were never wrong. The only explanation for such a large distance deviation in the shuttle was that the shuttle was interfered with. This was definitely not good news. Jiang Shangyu pulled Gu Xingyun and turned around directly. Buzz! The whole space suddenly twisted at the moment he turned around. The fierce buzz directly brought up a storm on the beach. The fierce and passionate sword light whistled. Sand and stones flew. In the twisted space vortex, a slender figure who looked very young stepped out. Countless virtual lines were connected to him, densely packed. The space vortex was completely formed. The virtual lines disappeared completely. Virtual shuttle? Jiang Shangyu's pupils suddenly contracted. But the young figure who was shuttling here didn't talk nonsense at all. An extremely heavy and wide giant sword quickly took shape in his hand. As his eyes moved, without any hesitation, the giant sword was raised with violent sword energy, and the sword directly chopped at Jiang Shangyu's head. The sword energy surged. It was like a thunderbolt. Chapter 1172. Abrupt, violent, swift, domineering, and determined. A familiar sword, a stranger. In less than 3 seconds after realizing that his shuttle had been intercepted, the giant sword had broken through the air and arrived. The killing intent was overwhelming. The sharp and fierce sword energy rolled up the yellow sand and set off a storm. The constantly trembling sword edge almost reached Jiang Shangyu in an instant. For Jiang Shangyu, he had no way to fight back. Beside him was Gu Xingyun. He was a chess piece that he had to protect. One hand protected Gu Xingyun. The other hand had been cut off by Li Tianlan's sword energy. The only thing he could do was to retreat. The sword light fell, and a stream of light suddenly appeared in the sky from top to bottom. The stream of light almost touched the hair on Jiang Shangyu's face. At the critical moment, Jiang Shangyu completely ignored his injury. His body was tense to the limit, and he pulled Gu Xingyun and retreated straight. Almost at the same time, the afterimages of people and swords appeared on the beach. The afterimages of the giant sword smashed the illusory influence of Jiang Shangyu. The sword energy and the sword edge suddenly hit the ground with a heavy sound. The whole beach shook violently, and the soft sand flew all over the sky. With Jiang Shangyu's original landing point as the center, the beach hundreds of meters nearby was completely overturned, and a huge gully with a length of 100 meters and a depth of nearly 20 meters spread forward quickly. Lin Shi's body retreated 100 meters away. His face was extremely pale, and he narrowed his eyes as if he wanted to say something. But Lin Shi, who had intercepted him halfway, didn't bother to talk nonsense, nor did he want to give Jiang Shangyu a chance to speak. The moving pupils in his eyes instantly merged into one. Lin Shi's dark pupils suddenly enlarged, and the black pupils directly occupied his eyes in the blink of an eye. The fighting intent was like fire, the killing intent was soaring, and the sword energy was soaring. Lin Shi's aura instantly boiled to the highest point, and became the most real energy reaction in the real environment. Lin Shi seemed to become an energy source that constantly emitted energy, and the whole space was constantly twisted and broken under the impact of the energy. The giant sword in his hand crossed the beach. Lin Shi took a step forward, and the sword light swept across. The fierce sword light crossed a natural arc and came directly to Jiang Shangyu's chest. Bang! Gu Xingyun, whose face changed dramatically, finally reacted. With a wave of his hand, he suddenly formed several domains. Before the domains formed in front of him had time to expand, the sword energy brought by the sword edge had already swept across. Several domains were broken as soon as they touched them, but the broken domains did not explode. Several domains were directly absorbed by Jiang Shangyu the moment they were broken. The powerful force continued to stack. 30-meter mortal world, 10th unique domain, light world. In the blink of an eye, Jiang Shangyu twisted out several domains with the strongest protection. With great power, he constantly compressed the domains to a very small area, covering him and Gu Xingyun. He had no intention of attacking. Defense. Jiang Shangyu just defended. While defending, he was still pulling Gu Xingyun to retreat rapidly. The sword edge, with a natural sword energy arc, still tore through all of Jiang Shangyu's defensive domains without any stagnation. The arc of sword chi disappeared instantly. Boom! An earth-shattering sound rang out from behind. Gu Xingyun, who was pulled back by Jiang Shangyu, turned his head in horror, and his whole expression suddenly froze completely. In his sight, an unidentified assassin suddenly appeared. He didn't continue to chase after him. His body slowly rose in the air. The silent giant sword in his hand suddenly vibrated. The arc of light that easily tore through all the domains of him and Jiang Shangyu disappeared. But the sea behind him was completely boiling. The monstrous waves continued to rise behind him as his body rose. In an instant, they formed a tsunami that was hundreds of meters high. The sea level as far as the eye could see was roaring violently. The huge waves soared into the sky and completely turned into a tsunami that could destroy the heavens and the earth. The arc of light just now was just a flash of extremely fast sword energy. And the current tsunami was the pure sword intent of that sword. Lin Shi's black pupils were full of silence and indifference. He held the long sword in his hand and simply pointed at Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. It was like a straight stab. In an instant, the sword energy covered the sky and the earth. The tsunami of hundreds of meters high roared and rushed to the beach. The boundless sword energy all turned into awe-inspiring sword energy. The sword energy combined into the most violent tsunami, sweeping the sky and submerging the earth. The huge sound of the tide filled everything. The whole world was shaking in the crazy sound of the tide. The 1,000-meter-long beach was submerged in an instant. The monstrous tsunami smashed into the forest on the periphery of the beach. Large pieces of trees fell down, and the tsunami kept surging. Several poor buildings nearby were directly smashed under the incredible impact. The tsunami was mighty. This was the real power of heaven and earth. Whether it was the beach, the forest, or the city, they could only be completely submerged under such power. Lin Shi appeared at the top of the tsunami. His body rose and fell with the rise and fall of the huge waves, and the killing intent all over his body became more and more fierce. Jiang Shangyu's figure stopped at the edge of the forest. A dark domain formed in front of him. The domain condensed like a knife and tore apart the surging tide. It was like an endless tsunami that could destroy the world, constantly hitting the dark domain. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun were suppressed by the tsunami and fell to the beach that had become the surface of the water. Gu Xingyun was also releasing his own domain. The two domains merged with each other. The space around Jiang Shangyu kept trembling, and all kinds of domains bloomed at the same time. Finally, they temporarily resisted the almost destructive tsunami. A large amount of seawater rushed past the two of them, rushed into the forest, and rushed to the mountains in the distance. The tsunami behind Linxi was still roaring and boiling, and it was getting higher and higher. The huge waves hundreds of meters high were constantly surging, like a mountain standing behind Linxi. Running is not the way. Jiang Shangyu said softly, "We can only fight." Above the huge waves, Linxi seemed to hear Jiang Shangyu's voice. The corners of his mouth twitched. Then he raised his palm again. Whoosh! Suddenly, an extremely fierce whistling sound rang out in the world. It seemed that the whole space was constantly being compressed. A large amount of water gathered in Linxi's hands at an unimaginable speed. Jiang Shangyu's face changed, and his domain expanded rapidly. The darkness continued to spread. An endless barrage of cannons shot out from the domain. A large number of cannons continued to fire at Linxi and the tsunami. More and more water splashed in Linxi's hands. The boundless water vapor condensed in his hands and turned into a round wheel of light. The wheel of light spun wildly in his hands, getting faster and faster. The space in front of Linxi was constantly twisted in front of the wheel of light that was getting faster and faster, and was finally cut apart. The wheel of light that seemed to be constantly spinning was water. It was water that was compressed and condensed to the extreme by the sword energy. When the seemingly harmless water droplets gathered to a certain extent, they could turn into a vast ocean. When the countless water droplets rose and fell, they would create a destructive tsunami. When the water droplets were compressed to the extreme, they could also become an invincible divine weapon. The wheel of light in Linxi's hands kept spinning, with unimaginable sharpness and sharpness. The dark domain completely enveloped Linxi's body. Inside the domain, the artillery fire was flying, constantly attacking Linxi and the huge waves at the same time. Linxi suddenly waved his hand. The sharp whistling sound in the air suddenly became extremely high and mournful. The wheel of light in Linxi's hands spun wildly and left Linxi's palm. Another wheel of light appeared in Linxi's hands. Another one. Then another one. Linxi kept waving his hands. Behind him. As he waved his hands, the tsunami began to shrink. A large number of water splashes were compressed into divine weapons at the fastest speed. The wheel of light flew horizontally and vertically in the domain. It was different from the tsunami that covered everything. The constantly dancing light wheels were a completely different form of covering the sky and covering the earth. The wheel of light went straight forward with incomparably powerful sword energy. A large number of batteries were completely torn apart. The domain space began to shake. Cracks kept appearing. Linxi raised his hands at the same time. The tsunami that was hundreds of meters high disappeared in an instant. A clear light shone in Linxi's hands. At this moment, he was floating in the air, holding a full moon in his hands. It was light, bright, and round, but with extremely sharp sharpness. The sword energy halo, which was like a full moon, kept spinning and was directly thrown out by Linxi. In the dark domain, the bright light flashed away. Crack! The solid domain created by Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, which was superimposed with several kinds of domains and mixed with the shadow rules, was completely torn apart in an instant. The sword energy halo, which was like a full moon, surged and exploded. The sword light danced all over the sky. Wisps of sword energy easily penetrated the bodies of Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu. Blood flowed unscrupulously from the two of them. In an instant, the bodies of the two masters, who had just escaped from Li Tianlan's hands, were riddled with holes. The sword qi was boundless and endless, growing and multiplying without end. The extreme sharpness and sharp penetrability made Gu Xingyun completely lose his composure at this moment. Impossible! Blood sprayed from all over his body. Gu Xingyun's face was twisted and ferocious. Is he stronger than Li Tianlan? It was almost impossible. But in Gu Xingyun's view, it was true. Countless rays of sword light penetrated his body, bringing about dense holes. All the wounds healed crazily in the shadow rules. Gu Xingyun's expression was full of disbelief. The opponent's sword light was incredibly sharp. The sharp edge easily pierced through their bodies. This was something that even Li Tianlan could not do. Jiang Shangyu was also standing in the overwhelming torrent of sword energy, and he was silent. Countless rays of sword light penetrated his body, bringing a lot of blood. The wounds on his body healed and tore repeatedly. He stared at Lin Shi without saying a word. Of course, Lin Shi could not be stronger than Li Tianlan. At least in the real environment, he could not do this. But the opponent could intercept his shadow travel, and the timing was so precise, which fully explained his origin. The opponent was obviously not a native of this era of Miracle City. He was from the ancient human clan in the starry sky. Space-time corridor, neutral camp. The assailant in front of him was obviously a person who really had high-level authority. High-level authority would be suppressed in the real environment. However, those who possessed high-level authority basically all had their own characteristics. This kind of characteristic would also be suppressed in the real environment. But it was not absolute suppression. In the first second when the opponent's sword light penetrated his body, he had already received the feedback of his own shadow center. Warning, high-energy reaction of the enemy detected. Confirming alignment. Warning, enemy alignment confirmed, neutral. Warning, enemy's authority confirmed, martial artist. Warning. The opponent's characteristics were successfully activated. Characteristics: soul capture, preliminary activation when fighting against shadow creatures, damage in any situation is increased by 100% to 300%. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignores 50% to 80% of the defense of shadow creatures. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack has a 75% chance to cause true damage. Chapter 1173. Jiang Shangyu's eyes kept flashing as he retreated rapidly. Soul capture. There was no doubt that this was a characteristic that completely targeted all shadow creatures. It could increase the damage by up to 3 times, with a high probability of ignoring the defense and a high probability of causing true damage. Soul capture was definitely one of the best special abilities in the neutral faction, and it already had such a bonus from its initial activation. The strength of the opponent's sword energy was not greater than that of Li Tianlan, but because the opponent had started soul capture, its lethality to Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun was far greater than that of Li Tianlan. This was the ultimate target for Dark Shadow. The Shadow Center's hurried warning sounds rang out one after another. Warning! The enemy's characteristics were further activated. Soul capture, preliminary application when fighting against shadow creatures, damage in any situation increased by 200% to 500%. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored 60% to 85% of the shadow creature's defense. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack had an 85% chance of causing true damage. From preliminary activation to preliminary application, all kinds of amplifications were further enhanced. The Shadow Center's alarm became more and more urgent. Searching the shadow memory space, searching for special soul capture. Search failed, no matching item. Failed to confirm the enemy's identity. Simulating the characteristics of soul capture. Soul capture, preliminary application when fighting against shadow creatures, damage in any situation increased by 300% to 600%. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored 80% to 85% of the shadow creature's defense. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack had a 90% chance of causing true damage. Soul capture, complete application when fighting against shadow creatures, damage in any situation increased by 500% to 800%. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored the shadow creature's defense. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack had a 100% chance of causing true damage. Soul capture, deep application when fighting against shadow creatures, damage in any situation increased by 500% to 800%. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored the shadow creature's defense. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack had a 100% chance of causing true damage. Soul Capture, peak application when fighting against shadow creatures, damage in any situation increased by 900% to 1,200%. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored the shadow creature's defense. There was a 50% chance of causing 3 to 5 times the damage. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored the shadow creature's defense. Soul Capture, absolute application when fighting against shadow creatures, damage in any situation increased by 1,000% to 1,500%. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored the shadow creature's defense. There was an 80% chance of causing 3 to 5 times the damage. When fighting against shadow creatures, any attack ignored the shadow creature's defense. There was a 50% chance of causing 5 to 5 times the damage. Soul Capture, absolute application. A matching item appeared. Property, termination. End, absolute control when fighting against non-neutral faction creatures, plus 30% movement rate, plus 50% attack speed, plus 150% critical damage, plus 1,000% to 1,500% damage to any environment. Any attack ignores 80% of the target's defense and deals triple damage, plus double true damage. 30% chance to completely end targets with less than 20% HP, 50% chance to completely end targets with less than 15% HP, 100% chance to completely end targets with less than 10% HP, suppress the target's life force, ignore all characteristics, and suppress all resistance. Exclusive, Huangxi. Soul Capture, absolute control, and end, absolute control, compatibility, 55%. He confirmed the enemy's identity for the second time. Huangxiao, Xinyuo, Warlords, Heaven Deceiving King, different permissions. Equal King, different permissions. Targets with inconsistent permissions, 9, collapse/expand, target identity verification failed, no matching item. Analysis of target failed. The target is shielded by the human race's providence and has a special energy source that cannot be analyzed. Danger Index Evaluation, extremely lethal. You have a 60 to 85% chance of dying. It is recommended to activate the first emergency plan. Boundless sword light covered the sky and covered the earth as it surged over. Jiang Shangyu's flickering eyes finally changed. It was not because of the 85% chance of dying analyzed by the Shadow Center. It was because of the line of analysis before this. The target is shielded by the human race's providence and has a special energy source that cannot be analyzed. Shielded by the human race's providence, shielded by the human race's providence. Under the starry sky, there were countless races in the endless star zone, but there were only a few creatures that could be shielded by the providence. As for the neutral camp and the human race, there were even fewer people who could meet this condition. This was a symbol of status, level, and identity. Even the lords in the time and space corridor, although they could not fully analyze it, would not say that they were shielded by the human race's providence. There was only one person who really met this condition. Human Emperor. Human Emperor who had mastered the power. No matter what the other party's identity was now, at least a long time ago, he was a human emperor who stood at the peak of the human race. The enemy who suddenly appeared in front of him was one of the returning human emperors. Jiang Shangyu lost all his fighting spirit in an instant. Human Emperor did not refer to the one in the Imperial Palace. In fact, although Jiang Shangyu merged with the unknown in the space-time of the God of War's realm and the Imperial Palace, the unknown that merged with him had been silent for too long, and there was no knowledge of the human emperor and the God of War in his mind. The so-called human emperor meant what it said literally. The emperor of the human race. He stood with heaven and earth, stood side by side with the gods, controlled the power, and was indestructible. Every human emperor had an absolutely real brand. For example, the current great emperor Xianyuan, the God of War, and the human emperor were all like this. Their combat power might not be as good as the original Huangshi, but every human emperor was the strongest at the peak of the neutral camp. Even in a suppressed real environment, the real brand on them was enough to temporarily break the confinement of the real environment. Jiang Shangyu could not defeat Li Tianlan, and in this state, he could not defeat the attacker in front of him either. Who the hell are you? The sword light was like a mountain and a sea, heavy and violent. Jiang Shangyu's figure retreated at full speed, and the idea of fighting just now had completely disappeared. His figure flickered with difficulty in the space filled with sword light, dodging the fiercest sword qi. His voice rang out from all directions. "My name is Lin Shi." Lin Shi said indifferently. With his voice, it seemed that the boundless sword energy shook between heaven and earth. The huge sword edge trembled slightly, and Lin Shi's whole body was like a meteor, piercing Jiang Shangyu with the shining sword light. The distance between the two sides was instantly shortened. The sword light condensed, and the sharp-edged sword. The sword energy easily tore the domain in front of Jiang Shangyu, and once again pierced Jiang Shangyu's chest. Black blood gushed directly from Jiang Shangyu's back. Lin Shi raised his eyebrows and said yes. At this moment he could clearly feel that the sword had pierced into Jiang Shangyu's chest, but a considerable part of the damage had been completely transferred. As a creature that had accepted the shadow, after adapting to the rules of the shadow, he directly twisted his internal organs at the critical moment, so that the sword that should have pierced into Jiang Shangyu's heart did not hit the vital parts at all. In this case, except for Jiang Shangyu, no one knew where his vital parts were. Maybe it was in the head, maybe it was in the soles of the feet, or even in the knees. Everything was possible. The two of them, one advancing and the other retreating, withdrew from the beach in an instant and rushed into the forest. The edge of the forest submerged by the tsunami flew backward. Jiang Shangyu's face turned blue and gray, and his speed was getting faster and faster. Black blood flowed out of his body, gradually forming a layer of black sticky film on him. Lin Shi suddenly sneered and sped up again. He waved the huge sword in his hand and swept it again. A large amount of sticky film surged in Jiang Shangyu's hands. The black sticky film kept twisting under the sword light, and countless tiny arms suddenly stretched out on the smooth surface. The tiny arms kept stretching on the surface of the sticky film, as if they were grabbing something outward. Layers of defensive domains bloomed from each of the tiny arms. The sword light shattered everything. Countless domains disappeared completely under the sword light. The lethality of the characteristic soul capture to the shadow creatures was something that Jiang Shangyu could not resist at this moment. Jiang Shangyu had no other ideas. He just wanted to delay and escape. Only when he escaped to his second base again could he have a chance to turn the tables. The edge of the huge sword tore the domain. Lin Shi took a step forward and directly approached Jiang Shangyu. The huge sword stabbed straight again. The wild sword energy between heaven and earth had been extremely violent. It was a completely suffocating sense of oppression and aggressiveness. As the huge sword was waved, the sword energy all over the sky whistled at the same time. The whole forest was trembling, and the ground was constantly cracking, turning into cracks that spread in all directions. The extremely dull but harsh sound was like the whole world was moaning. Countless sticky films surged and appeared on Jiang Shangyu's broken arm. The adhesive film quickly took shape and formed a new arm in a short time. A ferocious look flashed across Jiang Shangyu's face. The distance was modified in an instant. In the blink of an eye, Gu Xingyun's body retreated a distance of thousands of meters. Jiang Shangyu raised his arm made of sticky film, and without any hesitation, he directly smashed it on the tip of the sword that was stabbing straight in front of him. The sticky film was completely deformed, and a large amount of mucus splashed from his arm. Accompanied by incomparably messy cries and wild laughter, Jiang Shangyu gritted his teeth and took a step forward. The distance between the two of them was almost completely close. Countless domains were surging, and they exploded as soon as they were formed. The destructive power roared and smashed toward Lin Shi. No retreat. Lin Shi's dark pupils flashed with a dim light, and he did not retreat at all. He twisted his body, swung his arm, and the huge sword swept again. His movements were simple and unadorned, but his every move was filled with a kind of extreme violence and tragedy. A dazzling arc of sword energy suddenly burst out on the huge sword and expanded rapidly. Facing the destructive explosive power coming toward him, Lin Shi rushed in without hesitation. He went forward with indomitable will and would not retreat until he died. The stormy sword energy collided wildly with the constantly annihilating domain in the forest. The huge sword in Lin Shi's hand danced fiercely. The wildly exploding domain left wounds on his body one after another. His flesh was torn open, blood flowed, and his bones were deformed. Lin Shi ignored everything. Kill, 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 kill. The constantly exploding domain caused extremely heavy damage to Lin Shi in the shortest time. His injuries were getting worse. But all of Jiang Shangyu's attacks were ineffective, because Lin Shi had been attacking. In the face of all his counterattacks, this madman chose to attack from beginning to end. He gave up all the defense and did not consider any consequences. He went forward with indomitable will, attacked fiercely, attacked wildly, and fought to the death. Nothing could make him retreat even half a step. Knife mountain, fire sea, Azura hell, world-destroying punishment. As long as he was still alive, as long as he could still kill, he would not hesitate to move forward and forward. He was a martial artist. And this was the essence of the martial artist's authority. It was invincible, invincible, and invincible in the world. Gods and demons, heaven and earth, the world. All obstacles would be broken. On the road of martial arts, there was only moving forward, always moving forward, never retreating. The whole world was his enemy, so what if he was in a desperate situation? The rules were chaotic, so what if he looked directly at gods and demons? The world was turned upside down, so what if the world ended? Kill! Therefore, the peak authority of martial arts was called God of Killing. All the way forward, killing everything. Countless attacks all fell on Lin Shi, but they were completely ignored by Lin Shi. The sword in his hand did not stop for even a second. Keep attacking. Suppress, keep suppressing. Ignore victory or defeat, fight to the death, and move forward bravely. All the attacks did not stop Lin Shi from moving forward. Jiang Shangyu could only keep retreating. Lin Shi advanced without retreating. The soaring sword energy surged, and the two entangled figures completely crushed the forest. Countless giant trees were broken into powder in the mighty sword light. The ground was torn like a spider web, and the boulders were completely smashed. Plants, buildings, hillsides, sentry posts, everything was completely overturned by the surging and crazy sword light. Ruins and dust were flying everywhere. There was only Jiang Shangyu left in Lin Shi's eyes. All his emotions were suppressed, and his incomparably firm belief was pure and resolute. The intense battle was carried out in a nearly one-sided manner. Lin Shi's offensive became more and more crazy. He waved his sword, collided, swept, and chopped vertically. Dan's movements were crisp and efficient under his extreme speed. 1 minute and 52 seconds. All the forest within thousands of meters was swept away by the sword light. Gu Xingyun had left under Jiang Shangyu's command. Jiang Shangyu withdrew from the forest and rushed to the endless mountains behind the forest. A huge and deep crack appeared behind Jiang Shangyu and continued to spread. The soaring sword energy was still flying. Lin Shi's figure was like a flash of lightning, and the violent sword energy almost tore the whole mountain in an instant. Jiang Shangyu's figure was the first to escape to the top of the mountain. The top of the mountain was directly smashed by the sword light. Jiang Shangyu's figure began to fly back and rushed into the endless mountains. Boom! The soaring artillery fire ignited the sky without warning. The strong explosion filled every space in the sky and on the ground. The artillery shells were whistling. Flash bombs, gas bombs, and all kinds of chemical weapons appeared in the shortest time. The sound of gunshots and artillery fire exploded in the mountains without warning. Jiang Shangyu laughed. He dared to build his second base near this military base because he had already got through all the relationships. Although the strength of this base was not strong and could not be compared with those elite troops of Zhongzhou state, it was at least a help. Gunshots rang out in all directions. One helicopter after another quickly took off, and countless cannonballs, with the help of the weapon system, completely locked Lin Shi's body. In an instant, all the weapons of the entire base were completely aimed at Lin Shi. For the first time, Lin Shi's expressionless face showed a trace of obvious anger. These ambushers were beyond his expectation. They might be mercenaries from the dark world or other dark forces, or they might have other identities. But these were not important. At least in Lin Shi's eyes, these people had only one identity. They should be killed for helping the shadow creatures. Rebel! A grand and majestic voice suddenly sounded between heaven and earth. Lin Shi's figure flashed instantly. The sword light crisscrossed, and countless artillery fire was smashed by the sword light before it could get close to his body. The explosion was earth-shattering. The artillery fire that exploded in the air was like grand fireworks. In the raging artillery fire, a sharp arc light that almost ran through the whole world appeared. The crescent-shaped arc light, centered on Lin Shi, became 2, and then 4. 4 incomparably huge sword energy flew in an instant and swept across the entire mountain range. A reign of terror. The sound of gunfire was much quieter in an instant. Corpses and blood flowed freely in the mountains. The thick smoke after the destruction of the machinery and the explosion rose high into the sky. The crescent-shaped sword energy kept whistling between heaven and earth. Lin Shi's body did not stop at all and continued to rush toward Xianxia. Boom! The helicopter in front of him had no time to turn. Lin Shi rushed past it, and the helicopter shook and exploded. In the thick smoke, a dazzling blue electric arc lit up for a moment. It seemed that the thunder-shocking realm expert in the base wanted to fight back, but the electric arc was extinguished as soon as it lit up. The overwhelming sword energy swept every corner of the mountain range. Lin Shi's figure kept accelerating in the air, piercing Jiang Shangyu with raging fire and sonic booms. Jiang Shangyu stopped where he was. An extremely viscous dark domain slowly spread out from his side. This was the strongest domain that he had initially made use of the shadow rule after integrating countless unique skills of the domain. It was called the Dark World. From the beach to the forest, from the forest to the mountain peak, from the mountain peak to the mountain range, the sky was full of blood rain, and the sword energy was like a tide. Jiang Shangyu finally decided not to run. It was absolutely dangerous for anyone with any authority to get close to a pure martial artist. Jiang Shangyu thought that he could not get rid of Lin Shi in his current state. He had no choice. Therefore, even if it was the worst choice, it had now become the best choice for him. In any case, it was better than dying directly. This mountain range was nearly 100 kilometers away from the number 2 base. Under normal circumstances, within this distance, it would be difficult for him to escape Lin Shi's pursuit. As an unknown, the only thing he could do was to fight against the enemy, even though he was in such a mess but still could not get rid of the enemy. Even though it would cost him something he didn't want to pay. Jiang Shangyu's eyes were blood red. His eyes, which had always been calm and deep, showed undisguised ferocity and hatred for the first time. "You forced me," Jiang Shangyu said softly. His voice was very light, but it easily brought a burst of echoes between heaven and earth, like the whisper of a devil. "You forced me, then go to hell." The dark world expanded rapidly and enveloped Lin Shi's figure. The fire and sonic booms that had been ignited in the high-speed charge disappeared in an instant. But Lin Shi still did not hesitate at all. The sword light suddenly shone and stabbed straight. Bang! Without any warning, countless black blood suddenly burst out from all parts of Jiang Shangyu's body. The blood gushed out from all parts of his body, but it did not fall. Instead, it rose up. Countless drops of black blood condensed into a weird shadow behind Jiang Shangyu in the shortest time, which was enough to break everyone's cognition. Jiang Shangyu's body was instantly powerful to the extreme under the cover of this shadow, and then became extremely weak in the blink of an eye. The strength kept changing without rules. 2 incomparably deep beams of light lit up in the dark world. The shadow behind Xianxia opened its eyes. This moment was so short that it couldn't be perceived at all. In less than 1,000th of a second, the shadow's eyes closed again. In an instant, the dark world shrank rapidly. The space kept changing. The mountain range disappeared. An extremely soft ground appeared under Lin Shi's feet, which seemed to be wriggling at any time. Around him was a black and twisted jungle. In the jungle, a village with a rich blood color and extreme black appeared. Countless buildings in the village were twisting. Figures appeared behind Xianxia one after another. Everyone's body was also twisting incredibly. Xianxia's figure stood in front of everyone, and his smile was ferocious and insidious. Welcome to my base. I don't care which human emperor you are. Next, you can die in peace. Chapter 1174. Time was the most precious thing, but it was also the most meaningless illusion. Time passed eternally. Using the word passing to describe time was, to a certain extent, a mistake. If time was an accurate definition, then any accurate definition should be eternal and unchanging. It would neither move forward nor backward. Living things grew in the passing of time. People would get hungry, trees would grow old, flowers would wither, and everything would come to an end. Death, rebirth. It seemed that very few people had truly thought about whether the so-called living, so-called growth, so-called aging, so-called death, all of this was based on the cognition of living things and whether it had anything to do with time. Time moved. In different areas, in different directions, relative to different objects of reference, it was either fast or slow. It was impossible to unify. Then, was everything that living things experienced relative to the so-called time? Or was it intersecting? Time existed in everyone's cognition, real and clear. But in the cognition of the entire world, what meaning did time have? Humans, any living things, the intelligence of all species, and any civilization seemed to have an almost instinctive cognition before seeing the real world. It was a sense of superiority. Humans looked down on ants. And in the world of ants, there were also things that they looked down on. Every species was unique, excellent, and the main character of the world in their own cognition. But the world did not have a main character. No living thing was a main character. In the past, in the present, in the future, they were not, and they would never be. If there really was a main character, then the so-called main character was only the world itself. The survival of life itself were the luckiest accidents and coincidences. We lived in the world, but the world had never had anything to do with us. It was just like time. The passage of time in people's cognition had nothing to do with people at all. The opposite of time would never be a living thing, but space. Time and space combined to form space-time. When space-time was big enough, infinitely big, it was the entire world. Living things, plants, and everything else were not even a speck of dust in the incomparably huge space-time. There was no struggle, no risk, no exploration, no bleeding, no injury. When everything was living in the unknown, destruction was the inevitable outcome, and it was also an unintentional process when the world changed. The most fundamental meaning of the existence of any life was to struggle for its own survival. The world had nothing to do with me. I had nothing to do with the world. The world was expanding, time was passing, space was solidifying, and light was shrinking. The exquisite virtual screen in the hotel room showed the extremely tragic battle scene. In the oppressive and almost frozen atmosphere, everyone in the hotel saw the indescribable shadow behind Xianxia. Two obscure rays of light shot out from the shadow like two gazes. Xianyuan Wushang, apostle, saint, Xing Tian, all of them fell into a trance for a moment. The two rays of light behind Xianxia stretched out their consciousness. There seemed to be an irresistible great existence opening its eyes in the dark. He glanced at Lin Shi, and then looked at them through Lin Shi. The screen stood firmly in the hotel. But everything in the hotel room froze in an instant. The world was silent. The two beams of light on the screen appeared in an instant, and then disappeared with Xianxia and Lin Shi. F*CK. Xianyuan Wuxiang's expression changed dramatically as he jumped up from the sofa. Where is he? The apostle's face darkened. He didn't go to find Lin Shi immediately. Instead, he looked at the clock on the wall, and his face suddenly became gloomier. They looked at the screen in front of them, saw the light coming from the screen, and saw Lin Shi's figures suddenly disappear. Everything was natural and logical. There was no pause at all. In their perception, it was only a few seconds. But in fact, in the moment of their perception, more than 2 hours had passed. Xianyuan Wuxiang also found the chaos in time. Their authority belonged to the order camp, so they were naturally sensitive to chaos. More than 2 hours, Xianyuan Wuxiang was completely silent. The sound of the mobile phone kept ringing. Xianyuan Wuxiang took the phone, which was a little awkward to use, and looked at the screen. He was not used to using such an ancient thing as a mobile phone, but he could see the content on the screen clearly. All the major domestic media, from the official to the private, urgently pushed an international news. A major earthquake occurred in South America's Cultivation province. The earthquake occurred abruptly and rapidly, and the intensity of the earthquake even exceeded the technical statistics of the current era. A magnitude 15 earthquake? A magnitude 20 earthquake? Or even a more advanced earthquake? The huge earthquake that lasted for less than a minute tore apart the entire Jiao province's land plate. Nearly 400 square kilometers of mountains disappeared in the earthquake and were completely submerged by the sea. At the epicenter of the earthquake, a naval force of nearly 20,000 people in Jiao province perished in the earthquake. According to incomplete statistics, at least 200,000 people in Jiao province perished in this earthquake. Up until now, there were endless aftershocks erupting all over Godia's territory. It was estimated that in 3 to 5 days, Jiao province and the surrounding areas would continue to encounter unimaginably strong typhoons and tsunamis. According to speculation, in the next 10 to 15 years, due to the violent shaking of the South American land plate, the overall impact would affect South America. All the countries in North America and more than 1 billion people's lives would be affected to varying degrees. Especially South America would become a frequent area of countless natural disasters. Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, and volcanic eruptions were all possible. The most serious consequence would even completely separate the land plates of South America and North America. At that time, the violent weather change would directly affect the global climate. Cultivation formally applied for international assistance to the United Nations an hour ago. Zhongzhou State, Star State, East Island, Germany, and other countries had already begun to mobilize resources. At the same time, they would send scientific research teams to Cultivation to investigate the cause of the earthquake. Xianyuan Wuxiang clumsily scrolled through his phone and remained silent for a long time. For Cultivation, for America, for the whole world, this was bad news. Because all of this meant that this was just the beginning. In the future, all kinds of effects would continue to erupt in the next few decades. That would be a real disaster. But Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes showed some relief. It's okay. The apostle, who was also silent, suddenly said something. A hint of a smile appeared on his face. This smile was very bitter and gloomy, but it also had a hint of relief. A thought clone of mine is now near the battlefield. The apostle continued. How's the situation? Xianyuan Wuxiang's spirits rose. It's similar to what the news said. The entire mountain range has been completely submerged by the sea. The forest, the beach, the mountains, and the base have all disappeared. The edge of the sea has become a cliff that is more than 100 meters tall. That area is full of chaotic rules, and it's impossible to analyze specifically. The apostle shook his head. However, based on the scene from the follow-up effects reported on the news, it can be inferred that the unknown in Xianxia is still in an absolutely weak period and has not woken up. All this should be caused by a wisp of consciousness of the unknown in sleep. Otherwise, even if it is the doomsday in an absolutely weak period, once it really opens its eyes, the entire miracle city will be destroyed. Although the disaster at present is not small, at least it is within the bearable range. Currently, many countries in Miracle City are unable to detect the chaotic rules. They have no way to explain this, so they can only say that it was an earthquake. But in fact, Goethebia's strength in South America was not weak. If it was really an earthquake, no matter how big the earthquake was, they would not have applied for international assistance as soon as it happened. Obviously, they had realized that something was wrong this time. That's good. Jiang Shangyu is here. If he doesn't die this time, something will break out sooner or later in the future. Let's use the matter of Goethebia to let the world have at least some mental preparation. It's much better than being caught unprepared. Shenyuan Wushang also let out a long breath. At that moment, if the Doomsday's consciousness hadn't fluctuated and he had really opened his eyes, Lin Shi would have died without a doubt. No one knew what Lin Shi's final fate would be if he died in the absolute chaotic rules of the Doomsday, and the Miracle City would also be destroyed. All of this would become his responsibility, and Shenyuan Wushang could not afford this responsibility at all. The attack on Jiang Shangyu was a surprise attack, but when he thought about it carefully, in fact, it was still a little reckless. Jiang Shangyu, Shenyuan Wushang frowned, and his eyes were a little angry. The matter of Jiang Shangyu must be solved as soon as possible. Don't worry. The apostle nodded. We will do our best. In fact, this time Jiang Shangyu triggered a wisp of the Doomsday's consciousness, and he must have paid a great price. I even think that although the result of this battle is very troublesome, the threat that Jiang Shangyu can cause in the future will be much smaller. Compared to the safety and future of the entire Miracle City, all the sacrifices at present are not unacceptable. The corners of the apostle's mouth twitched, and he continued, and the sacrifices are all cosmic humans. I can accept it more. You can accept it, but the God of War's realm may not be able to accept your narrow-mindedness. We ancient humans are humans, but aren't cosmic humans also humans? Shenyuan Wushang sneered. When this matter is over, you can wait for the other party to hold you accountable. The apostle chuckled, his face expressionless. Shenyuan Wushang looked at the battlefield on the screen again. That battlefield had disappeared. What was reflected on the virtual screen was a vast ocean shrouded in a black aura. It drowned the entire battlefield and the entire mountain range. Shenyuan Wushang was silent for a moment, and then he asked, "Where is Lin Shi?" "I lost contact with His Highness. The unknown level is there, and even a wisp of consciousness is enough to cut off the connection between me and His Highness." The apostle's voice was calm and calm. Shenyuan Wushang turned around and squinted at him. "You don't seem worried at all?" "I'm not worried." The apostle smiled. "After all, it's not the real Doomsday. His Highness is the son of His Majesty the God of War, and you have received the true teachings of His Majesty the God of War. You seem to have forgotten the strongest unique skill of our God of War's realm." Shenyuan Wushang was stunned. The strongest unique skill of the God of War's realm that shook the starry sky. In fact, there was nothing new about it. The God of War grew all the way, from the beginning to the peak, and grasped the authority. But what supported him to ascend to the peak was still the 24 moves of sword. It was the broken reincarnation. It was the broken reincarnation. It was the reincarnation. Chapter 1175. In the last chapter, I confused Doomsday and Unknowns several times. I found out from the chat in the group. It's good that everyone understands. It's troublesome to change the chapter now. That's it. Lin Shi's crazy offensive finally stopped. The boundless darkness and silence in his eye sockets slowly dissipated, returning to his deep and brilliant eyes. At this time, black lines had already spread out from the twisted and blood-red village. Countless black lines stretched out in the base, densely packed, and covered every corner of the base like a spider web. A faint black mist floated everywhere. The forest and the village seemed to be the only thing in the world. With Lin Shi's perception, he couldn't sense the end of the base at all. He held the giant sword in his hand and was completely silent. All kinds of rules were constantly surging in the air. The real environment began to thin out at an unimaginable speed, becoming dim. Strength, speed, all kinds of privileges, and countless unique skills began to break away from the suppression of the real environment. Lin Shi could clearly feel that his combat power was increasing by several times, hundreds of times, or even tens of thousands of times. To be exact, this was not an enhancement, but a recovery after getting rid of the suppression of the real environment. At present, this base was even better than the base in Nanyun in terms of getting rid of the influence of the real environment. This was not good news. Lin Shi was indeed getting stronger. But with the change of the environment, his privileges would also be affected to a certain extent by the chaotic environment. As he became stronger, Xianxia, who was possessed by the unknown, would also become stronger. Although the unknown was in an absolutely weak state in a deep sleep, no matter how weak the state was the unknown. As long as he existed, no matter what state he was in, he would be the biggest threat in the starry sky. The current situation had completely exceeded his expectations. Perhaps the only thing Lin Shi could rely on was that although this base could get rid of part of the suppression of the real environment, it would not get rid of it completely. In this way, Lin Shi's combat power was still limited, but the unknown's various means in the weak state would not be too powerful. Lin Shi raised the sword in his hand and looked at Xianxia. Retreat? That was not a problem he considered at all. He was a warrior. The only thing he needed to do now was to kill and crush everything. When this base was destroyed, he would naturally be safe in the restored real environment. Xianxia's eyes were bloodshot. All kinds of emotions flowed through his eyes. His voice was indescribably erratic and gloomy. How do you want to die? Lin Shi didn't say anything. He just looked around indifferently. The unknown could be said to be the most terrifying existence in the starry sky, but it could also be the weakest pinnacle powerhouse. The unknown on Xianxia had shown some authority. Despite being in a state of absolute weakness and in a deep slumber, he was still able to suppress the fused King Wei and even force out his half-divine form, forcing him to reveal his order form. This was enough to prove that this unknown entity was absolutely powerful. The strange villagers in the base also indirectly confirmed some things. He, Xianyuan Wushang, and the apostles all agreed that the base Li Tianlan destroyed should be related to the soul. This meant that at least during this period, the position on Xianxia's body had the authority of the soul. Then what was this base for? The most frightening thing about the Shadow faction was the unknown power, which was that they had no way of understanding it. The Shadow faction was different from the Lawful faction, and even more so from the Neutral faction. They did not have clear authority, but under the chaotic rules, they could control all authority in the starry sky. It was all the authority in all camps. So now the unknown Lin Shi was facing might be a monster with all kinds of authority such as the calligrapher, the warrior, the apostle, the saint, and the swindler, or it could also be a high-intensity consciousness with no authority under the chaotic rules. But the possibility of the latter was obviously not high. He was almost sure that the position on the opposite side had at least the authority of the soul. This was the only thing he knew about this unknown entity. The influence of the real environment was constantly decreasing and completely stabilizing. To this extent, the suppression of the real environment was still there, but it was not absolute. The essence of the starry sky environment had been vaguely seen. Lin Shi took a deep breath. In the environment that was similar to the void, what he absorbed was not the air at all, but the ubiquitous dark energy under the starry sky. The surging dark energy filled every cell. In a bizarre light and shadow, Lin Shi's aura suddenly soared into the sky. Boom! A strong energy fluctuation suddenly exploded, and the void of the whole space suddenly boiled. Lin Shi's whole body instantly burst out a bloody light that penetrated the void. The light kept fluctuating, becoming more and more intense. The 8th level authority of the warrior. Immortal Azura. After getting out of the real environment to a certain extent, Lin Shi no longer had any scruples. The bloody energy fluctuation continued to boil. As Lin Shi raised the sword edge, the majestic sword light with the color of blood burst out directly in front of him. In the base that was similar to the void, a violent storm with a height of tens of thousands of meters was directly rolled up. Xianxia, whose eyes were bloodshot, slightly twitched the corner of his mouth. Behind him, a villager took a step forward. The extremely distorted body of the villager instantly turned into the appearance of Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu took a step back and hid in the crowd. But the villager who looked like Jiang Shangyu directly opened his palm. The whole base instantly became his domain. The domain only appeared for a moment. In the next second, an incomparably hot flame suddenly appeared in the void. The fire burned the void and filled the space between heaven and earth. It instantly turned from orange to pale white and then to black. The black sea of fire continued to burn, and the color became lighter and lighter, almost transparent, but the temperature was still rising infinitely. Fire flaming realm? It was not an absolutely accurate realm. After getting out of the real environment, it was not applicable at all. This was the fire element under the starry sky. Lin Shi finally completely confirmed the unknown authority. It was still uncertain how much authority the unknown person had, but it was already a huge gain to be completely sure of one. Controlling elements, playing with souls, reversing yin and yang, reversing time and space, manipulating energy, knowing everything. This was the authority that belonged to the Order camp. Under the starry sky, there were many names for this authority at the beginning. They were pioneers, mutants, and evolved creatures. As for the human clan, for the beginning of this authority, they called it the Enlightener. If the Doomsday represented omnipotence in the Order camp, the authority of the Enlightener represented omniscience. The original name of the Doomsday authority was Scholar, and the end of the Enlightener's authority was called the Creator. Everything became clear in an instant. In Nanyun province of Zhongzhou state, Jiang Shangyu's #1 base was related to the soul, so he used this authority to suppress King Wei. In South America's Zhao province, Jiang Shangyu's #2 base was related to space. From another perspective, Lin Shi was now going to face the whole world. It belonged to the unknown world. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.